Stillman and Company, 102.5, 106.3 The Game, streaming live on Twitter, Twitch, YouTube, and Facebook live from the Spring Hill Heating and Cooling Studios on a Fireball Hot Take Friday. Ian is here today. Hello, Ian.
What up, what up?
So we will have Coach Brian Callahan will join us. Titans head coach will sit down with us in 30 minutes, and we got a lot to discuss with him. So there is a report that's come out, Tom Pelissero, NFL Network, reporting that the Titans have asked permission to meet with, or interview, I should say, Nick Holes, the passing game coordinator of the Jacksonville Jaguars. They are reaching out to him. He was with the Raiders for a long time as like a quality control coach and an assistant receivers coach. He was the offensive coordinator at UNLV. Then he went with the Jags for a year as the passing game coordinator. He has experience with Brian Callahan dating back to the Raiders. And so that is apparently the leader in the clubhouse for the offensive coordinator position, and he is interviewing according to Tom Pelissero. Ian, do you have any problem at all with Nick Holes as the offensive coordinator?
I don't guess so, no.
Do you have any opinion on Nick Holes as the offensive coordinator?
Don't know much about this guy. Passing game coordinator, taking him from the Jacksonville, I don't know, sounds okay.
So I don't have any problem with it either. And I'll tell you why I don't have any problem with it. Because he gets the benefit of the doubt. Brian Callahan, when it comes to the coaching staff, specifically on the offensive side of the ball, if they were to say that, he's going to bring in Chuck Cecil, for instance, to be defensive coordinator, a guy we know is a bad defensive coordinator. If he said he was going to bring in Ray Horton to be defensive coordinator, that'd be one thing. But as far as, again, his offensive staff specifically, but even his defensive staff and his special teams choices, this is what got him hired. Like, as soon as he got hired, people were talking about, this guy could be OC, and this guy should be OC. And I'm like, does he even know that guy? Does he even know? I mean, you want him to be this coach. Does he know that guy? During the job interview at some point, I assume that they asked him, what would you envision your coaching staff looking like? And he probably, again, I assume, had a plan for that. So while the NFL has turned into a 24-hour drama and gossip cycle, which, of course, we love, as far as going over each individual coordinator candidate and the assistant coaches and I'm like, you know what? He's going to put together a staff. I don't worry about his ability to put together a staff. He's been in the league long enough. He's been in the league longer than he's been in the league because his dad has been in the league. So he knows people. He knows who could be a good coach. And most importantly, he probably knows who wouldn't be a good coach. So I'm not saying that every coaching hire he makes is going to be a good hire. I heard Paul today on the morning show say that Jim Schwartz told him one of his biggest problems in Detroit, his first go-round, was that he thought his first staff was supposed to be the best staff and that maybe he got a little too loyal to that first staff trying to be the best staff. And I get that. I hear that. But as far as what they put together, I'm not going to sit here and judge it good, bad, indifferent. Because, again, this is probably the plan that he sat down in front of ownership with last week and said, here's my plan for the coaching staff in order for us to be successful, and it got him hired. Now, if we get into the season and they can't pass the ball, we're going to have a different discussion. But as far as where we are right now, this is the benefit of the doubt time. And, yesterday TD gave me a hard time because he said that I didn't give Rand the benefit of the doubt. I gave him the benefit of the doubt last year. Didn't have a problem with Chad Brinker, Anthony Robinson. I didn't, have any qualms when they signed Andre Dillard. I did not like that they signed Aaron Brewer to a second-round tender when that didn't make any sense to me. I did not like how little attention they paid to wide receiver. I did not like any of that. But then once we saw how it played on the field, and then we saw the reaction to what happened on the field, then my opinion started to form. So again, on the coaching staff front, it's crazy because I don't know if it's always been like this or if it's just been like this since I started putting notifications on my phone every time Diana Rossini, Adam Schefter, or Ian Rappaport tweets. But I have gotten so many tweets and notifications of these tweets about so-and-so is interviewing with such and such team to be the defensive backs coach, is interviewing to be the defensive coordinator. And I'm like, okay. unless it's a name that we know, like somebody that we legitimately know that's like Vic Fangio, for instance, like a legitimate defensive coordinator, then it's hard for me to have an opinion. And even with a lot of these guys, a lot of our opinions, I believe, are formed from what these guys did as head coaches, and we just ignore sometimes what they did as coordinators. And I think Arthur Smith would be a good example of that. Arthur Smith was a good coordinator, and you know that. We all know that. But he wasn't a great head coach in Atlanta for whatever reason it was. Everybody says he didn't get the ball to the playmakers. I have a hard time believing that Arthur tried to not give the ball to his playmakers. I think it's because he probably screwed up the quarterback position. Probably thought he could coach up Desmond Ridder as opposed to bringing in an insurance policy behind Desmond Ridder. But I know he's a good OC. So I don't want to sound like this old man, the old man that gets mad about the combine and is like, I don't care about what guys run in their underwears. But I do kind of feel that way when it comes to breaking down each individual coach that they end up bringing in, and that includes offensive line coach. Because, again, this guy had to have had a plan on improving the offensive line. If he didn't have a plan, he probably wouldn't have gotten hired. So Nick Holes, Nick Foles, Nick Joels, I don't care. Whatever. Whoever he wants to hire, I'll give it the benefit of the doubt. I think he's probably got an idea and a plan, and it should be fine. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, we keep talking about what the coaches can do for the quarterback. But do we ever talk about what the quarterback can do for himself? This is a partnership. This is not an employee-employer relationship anymore. Years and years and years ago, Chuck Noll drafted Terry Bradshaw with the number 1 overall pick, and he stuck him on the bench behind Jefferson Street Joe Gillum. And he could do that. But you can't do that now. You can't take a guy number 1 overall in the draft and bench him for years the way Chuck Noll did with Terry Bradshaw. Years ago, Bill Walsh brought in Joe Montana. And then after that, he brought in Steve Young. And he promised Steve Young, Joe's only going to be here for another year. And he promised Montana, you don't have anything to worry about. And can't do that now. These are partnerships. If Levis fails, Levis gets fired. If Levis fails, Callahan might get fired. If Levis fails, Carthon might get fired. That's how the cookie crumbles. And so when we talk about what Callahan can do for the quarterback and what they can do by giving him an offensive line and better receivers and the scheme, and all of that is applicable. What we don't think about is what Will Levis can do for himself in order to improve. And I told you last week that I went back and I listened to the audio from 2018 when the Titans were looking for a head coach and ended up and landed on Mike Vrabel. And I had to say, expectations for Mariota and how they get Mariota better. And one part that Floyd absolutely highlighted at the time that I think we should highlight right now is Mariota getting himself better. Here's what he said in 2018.
How do we get Marcus good? Just judging from what I saw last year, he's going to have to work on his fundamentals. He'll have this entire offseason, and he needs to work on fundamentals. He's going to have to get on the same page with the receivers, and he needs to get all those receivers and fly them to Hawaii or fly them to Eugene, Oregon, or fly them to Franklin, wherever they can all get together, and they are going to have to live together for about 4 months, throwing every pattern in the book. This is exactly the way you run it. This is the way you run it against this coverage. This is the way you run it, and be on the same page in all of that. And if they don't do those kind of things, then you're going to run into the same issues we did this year, which is the receivers running it out, I'm throwing it in. Well, guess what? That's an interception.
So I do wonder this. Does Will Levis know that? I'm sure Will Levis knows he needs to work out. He needs to work hard during the offseason. He needs to all of these things. But does he know, hey, you need to be on the phone with Traylon Burks right now, and you need to be on the phone with DeAndre Hopkins and Tajay Spears and Chigakonkwo and Josh Wiley, and you need to have a plan for the entire offseason. And then if they add Roma Dunze, or if they sign Mike Evans, or whatever it may be, you got to have a plan. Remember when Tom Brady switched teams and he went to Tampa Bay and the COVID restrictions were in, and so the entire offseason program was virtual, and Tom Brady and his team had to go use a high school and they got kicked out of a park, and like they did whatever it took? That's the offseason Will Levis needs to have. And I hope that Brian Callahan can get that into Levis. I'm sure Levis wants to work hard. Everybody I've talked to says the kid works harder than you can imagine. Mark Stoops said that it's not about money, it's not about fame, it's not about all those things for him. It's about competing and winning, and that's good. But he's got to do those things. Because, again, it's not just about what can Brian Callahan do to make Will Levis good. Not what Nick Holes or whoever the offensive coordinator is going to be, whoever the quarterback's coach is going to be, whoever the passing game coordinator who's going to be, whatever. It's not about, again, just what all they can do for him. It's how do they get him good. And that's the entire key. That is a $250 million question. Because if they do get him good, then he will sign for $250 million. And I don't know about you guys, but I want the Tennessee Titans to be playing on this weekend in the future. And in order to do that in the AFC, you got to go through Lamar Jackson, Joe Burrow, Patrick Mahomes, Josh Allen. Justin Herbert's got Jim Harbaugh. C.J. Stroud looked like the real deal in Houston. The AFC is brutal at the quarterback position. And so if you want to be playing this weekend in the future, they got to get him good. But he's got to do his part too. And then again, I think it's on Brian Callahan to kind of get him to understand exactly what it is he needs to be doing. And it may not be. Look, I've seen Will Levis. I'm sure he works out. But it may be a little bit less than that. Hey, you need to be stretching and yoga more than just lifting weights. You need to be living with all your receivers and throwing the routes and everything else. I don't know. That's the job of the coach. But again, it's not about, oh, well, what do we do to make the learning process easier? What do we do? No. It's how do they get him good? 615-737-1025. We've got Brian Callahan again at 2:30. We will sit down with him, and I've got some questions that I want answered. We'll go over some of those and get to your phones next. Stillman and Company on a Fireball Hot Take Friday, 615-737-1025 is our phone number if you want to weigh in. Again, that's 615-737-1025 here on our program. Tune in to 94.9 The Fan tomorrow for Vandy men's basketball as they take on Tennessee at home. Pre-game is at 4:30. Tip-off is at 5. Coverage is also available on the 94.9 The Fan app and at 949thefan.com. And then on Sunday, we've got women's basketball as Vandy takes on South Carolina on the road. Pre-game 1:30, tip-off at 2. And coverage is also available on the 94.9 The Fan app and at 949thefan.com. Stillman and Company, Super Sunday is coming up, but so is Super Saturday. That's right. Super Saturday. Join us Saturday, February 10th at New Heights Brewery in Nashville from 1 to 5 for this fun, family-friendly soup fest benefiting the Nashville Predators Foundation. Enjoy live music, games for kids, and come sample soup from Bavarian Beer House, Homegrown Tap Room and Kitchen, Fat Bottom Brewing, Mama Java's, City Tap, and more. To purchase tickets and to see all participating restaurants, go to thegamenashville.com/soup. And you can also enter to win tickets to Super Saturday. Just text in the keyword soup, SOUP, to 615-737-1025. Great. That's going to, as excited as I am for Super Saturday, it's going to bomb my text line, but that's okay. So we've got Brian Callahan coming up right around the corner, and I do have some questions. And I know he got asked a lot of things yesterday, and, you know, it's kind of like a getting to know you and all kinds of things there. But here's what I want to know. First off, I want to know, like I said, how does Will Levis get better? Because, again, if the Titans want to be playing any time soon this weekend, on this championship weekend, they're going to have to get Will Levis good. He's going to have to be the rock that carries this organization. So, considering that he was probably hired with Levis in mind, and considering that yesterday he said he was excited to work with Levis, which I wouldn't doubt, I do wonder the how. Number 2, Derrick Henry. Does he want Derrick Henry back? I heard him say something on the morning show today about how he would be, you know, open to the idea of Derrick Henry coming back, but also how important is it to have a leader like Derrick Henry? Because we kind of talked about that, about what you're paying for when you get Derrick Henry. And if you look at the offense, they don't have a lot of leaders on that side of the ball right now. Levis is going to be a leader, but he's young. So how important is that? Then again, we talked about this yesterday with TD Summit. I do kind of want to know this. In Cincinnati, they had the 5th overall pick in 2021, and everybody was saying, because their offensive line was so bad, everybody was saying that they had to draft Penei Sewell, this unbelievable tackle out of Oregon. And Penei Sewell has become an unbelievable tackle out of Oregon. But they were interested in Jamar Chase. And there was a lot of talk, right? Like, oh, yeah, Jamar Chase played with Joe Burrow at LSU, and so they have that relationship, and he's a great receiver, and a great receiver versus a great tackle. So what about that? Because the Titans have the 7th pick, and 3 quarterbacks are going before 7. So now you're already at 4. There's 3 receivers that are supposed to be really good, and 2 tackles. So there's a chance that one of those tackles goes before and one of those receivers goes before, and so you're sitting there with a receiver or a tackle. So what do we think about that? I was actually surprised nobody asked about this yesterday, but I am going to ask when Brian sits down with us. What about Skoronski, left tackle, left guard? I know he went on a podcast last year and said that he thought he's probably more of a guard, but that's without having NFL film of him at guard. So when Brian Callahan dives on in and says, hey, we're going to build this thing around such and such, we want to, do you build it around Peter at left tackle, or do you build it around Peter at left guard? Or do you do what they promised that they would do last year but never did, and have an open mind about playing him at left tackle or left guard with all the OTAs and everything else that's upcoming? So I don't know. It should be noted. Now, I don't know who's going to be in free agency and who's not going to be in free agency, but it should be noted that when I looked at who is likely to be available, and I try to factor franchise tags in as much as anything. So when I'm looking at available free agents for next year, like, I know there's a chance that T. Higgins is not going to be available. A pretty good chance that T. Higgins is not going to be available. So I don't even think about that. But then I see a guy like Mike Evans, and I'm like, well, they're going to have to tag Baker if they don't get a deal done with Baker. And then, even then, you were talking about $25 million or so for Mike Evans on the tag. Would they do that? That guy might be available. But so just looking at what's available in free agency, it would make the Titans' life a lot easier if Skoronski could be their left tackle. And I don't know if he can with his arm length or not. I have no idea. I am not a line guru, but I do wonder how he sees it. Because there are going to be a lot of interior offensive linemen that are quality interior offensive linemen that are going to be available in free agency. And then, Ian, I'm going to do this.
Okay.
I'm going to tell him the right tackle story.
Oh, all right. I like it.
I don't want to have to tell the right tackle story over and over and over and over again, and I feel like I've had to do that.
Just get it out of the way now.
So I'm just going to tell him the right tackle story. Old Floyder's right tackle. Phone lines quickly. We'll get to some of these phones driven by WilsonCountyHyundai.com on a Fireball Hot Take Friday ahead of Coach Callahan joining us on the program. Texter says, hey, Jared, I know we all miss the GM, not as much as you, but I do wonder how you think he would feel about this head coaching hire. I know he was a Patriots guy, and how did he feel about Vrabel? I can't tell you how he felt about Vrabel, and I can't tell you how he'd feel about Brian Callahan. I do think this, though, and Ian, I want you to slap my hand if you think I'm stepping out of school here. Okay. By saying that I think that there's a chance he would think this. Where the game is going with the offensive coaches, I think he would sense, even though he was not when he was a GM looking for offensive coaches, I think he would sense where the game is going, and he would say, okay, now you got to go get an offensive coach.
Sure. I think that's fair. Yeah.
For the most part. And
Callahan's almost like this. I do wonder with his dad being a coach in the old school kind of realm, if Brian Callahan is almost some type of a little bit of a hybrid.
Right, like I know where he comes from, that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. But again, I don't want to say that he would endorse Brian Callahan because I have no idea, and I am not going to pretend to speak for that man, much less he make me pay for it from beyond the grave. And I'll say this, I was in the Titans facility today, and when you walk in, they have like all the Ring of Honor names up there with their numbers, and there's Floyd Reese's name just right up there on the wall. It's pretty cool. And I'm glad he knew about it. Justin says, I don't know if Carthon and Callahan are going to be a good duo. I do know that I want them to be successful. I want them to take this team and organization and make it the best it's ever been. I want Will Levis to be the MVP of the league next season, and I am praying for success for my team. Me too. Me too. Don't worry about, well, Jared thinks this. If Jared thinks something bad about the Titans, just know Jared wants it to be wrong. If Jared thinks something bad about the Predators, Jared wants it to be wrong. I have no problem being wrong. But I do have a problem with his lying. I don't like doing that. I do not like, manufactured opinions. I don't believe in that. But I am totally fine with being wrong and this team being great. And I again, we'll know a little bit later, but I do think I kind of like the coach. Texter says, the difference between the Bengals drafting Jamar Chase and the Titans drafting a wide receiver is there's not a wide receiver with prior history with Will Levis. Let's see. Let's ask the coach if that matters. We'll ask. So we'll do that next. Coach Brian Callahan sits down with us. Stillman and Company, 102.5, 106.3 The Game. First, let's talk about Fireball Whiskey. Fireball Cinnamon Whiskey goes down so smooth that it tastes so great. There is no better way to ignite the night than to do it with ice-cold Fireball Cinnamon Whiskey. For the best of times and sometimes for the worst of times. You need Fireball Cinnamon Whiskey. That's right. It's so great. So, again, this weekend we got a lot to celebrate. Ignite the night. Please do it responsibly and be 21 years or older to enjoy. Company 102.5, 106.3. The Game. You know what? We got Coach coming up here in a second, so let's go ahead and give away a pair of tickets on this wonderful Fireball Hot Take Friday. Be caller 5 right now at 615-737-1025, and you will be seeing Billy Currington and Kip Moore at Ascend Amphitheater on Saturday, May 18th. Tickets are on sale now. Good luck for that. Joined now by new Titans head coach Brian Callahan. Coach, first of all, congratulations. And I just want to say that yesterday, and I told you before we sat down, I said, hey, I'm kind of the mean guy around here, and so, it's okay. But I thought yesterday, everybody wins their introductory press conference. You won yours too. But when you started talking about your entire family, and then I listened to you talk about everybody in Cincinnati, and the emotion when you were talking about Zach Taylor, and then you talked about everybody in the building and how you wanted to meet everybody out there. And I was like, this is where society is headed. This is, instead of the way, like my grandparents grew up in the Great Depression.
Sure.
And I think the idea then was, hey, you should be lucky that you have a job and you should be thankful to get to go there every day. And if they tell you to do whatever, you do it. And I don't think society works like that anymore.
No, I don't think so either.
And so when I was listening to you yesterday talk about how you built your program, I'm like, this is going to be a program where it feels to me like you really want to make sure that everybody, even if they're not a player, feels like they're a special part of building what you want the Titans to be.
Absolutely, because if you don't have that and people don't want to be around you and people don't want to be in the building, then you're going to have a harder time connecting with people and you're going to have a harder time getting things done that you want to get done. And that doesn't mean that the culture that I preach is it's not all kumbaya. You know what I'm saying? Like, there's still a lot of work to be done, and we're going to be demanding and we're going to be hard on all those things. But if you don't start your program with you're trying to build relationships, then I think you're missing the point.
Coach, I want to start with the quarterback here because I know, when you take this job, it's kind of like, hey, what do you think of Will Levis? What do you this? What do you that? But what is it like in terms of a partnership with the quarterback? And the reason why I ask about the partnership with the quarterback is because, well, quite frankly, if you guys didn't get Joe right in Cincinnati, you would have been just as fired as he would have been.
Oh, absolutely.
And so it's not even more about like hey, you play for me. It's more of I think, where we are with the quarterback and the coach and the offensive staff and even the offensive line, everything else. It's like hey, we're all in this together right here. When you look at that partnership with Will Levis, where do you think you're probably most excited to get started?
I think there's such incredible room for him to grow. And he has all the physical tools that you would want in a quarterback. And he's a really intense competitor from what I've seen on tape. I see him putting his shoulder down. We probably want to do less of that. But I see him compete really hard, and I think it's important to him. And so there's a refinement that can happen, especially for him. Now he gets to take all the OTA reps, all the training camp reps, and now he's got a chance to develop. Whereas he was sort of competing for a job last year, and rightfully so.
Sure.
That's how it works. But to see how he played in games with the little bit of reps that he had, there's a lot of really positive things. There's plenty of things that we can correct. But I told him when I first called him that really the most important relationship in the building outside of me, Ran, and Amy is my relationship with him. And you do everything you can to prop the quarterback and put him in a great position. Without that sort of relationship with him and I, it would be difficult. And the best part about it for Will is that he's going to be able to have some input. I want to put him in great position, so the things that he likes, we'll try to highlight. The things that he's not as good at, we'll try to work on and integrate as he gets better. So I think that Will has the ability to be a really good player, and he's willing to work at it. And so my job is to help him get there.
The two things I see with him that I look at that could maybe hold him up. One is there's too many plays that I say are boneheaded plays, but plays that he would like to have back. Whether it's a missed throw here or whether it's an interception there or whatever it may be. The second thing is that, quite frankly, over the last 2 years, he gets injured too much. And some of that may be supporting him with a better offensive line or with a better scheme to protect him and get the ball out, or receivers getting open sooner, all of that. But when you look at those two things in particular, how do you go about addressing each one? And do you see the same thing I see?
Yeah, there's and I guess that's probably the best way for me to say that that's where the room for improvement comes. And I think when you watch, the plays that you'd like to have back, one of the first things that I've done with quarterbacks every offseason is you take all the interceptions. You take all the throws that should have been interceptions, the ones that didn't count,
Sure.
but they should have, and you evaluate what part went wrong. Was it a decision-making error? Was it a accuracy error? Was it a timing error? And then was it did you force the ball? Did the ball just get tipped? So every interception tends to have its own story. And so as few of those that can be decision-making errors, that's now what you're trying to get to. Like, you're going to throw interceptions. It happens. The ball's going to get tipped. Guys are going to make great plays. But for the quarterback, how do you best keep the ball out of harm's way with your decision-making, with your accuracy, with your timing? And so that's how you look at it. And that's how I see it. And I think there's a lot of room for him to improve with those things over what he's put on tape last year. And obviously we get now a chance to really dig our teeth into an offensive system for a whole offseason without having to worry about competing for the job in that sense.
New Titans coach Brian Callahan's with us. How much film prep did you do for these interviews? Because you're interviewing with all these different teams, and I mean, I know how much watching film really is. It's not like we watched an hour of film. It's a lot bigger than that. So how much prep did you do for these interviews, and specifically the Titans?
I had I watched a little bit of every team that I interviewed for, but the ones that the ones where there was some quarterback questions, Carolina, here, I wanted to make sure that when they asked me about the quarterback, I had a really solid answer and an opinion that was researched. And so I did watch quite a bit of tape of Carolina, and I watched all of Will's reps from the season. And so I just wanted to make sure that when I got asked the question, I was based on what I've seen, not what I thought I've heard or what I saw in 2 or 3 games in crossover. So I tried my best to be informed. You can't watch every bit of everybody for the interviews, and a lot of it's not really about that part yet. But the young quarterbacks that I knew were going to be questions in the interview process, I wanted to make sure I had a good feel for and were able to articulate the right answer.
Last one on Will. Everybody that I've ever talked to that's been around Will, whether it's here or, I talked to Coach Stoops about it last summer. I talked to Coach Cohen before the draft about it. And everybody that's ever been around Will Levis just freaking loves the kid. Mm-hmm. Like, Coach Cohen told me that his academic advisor at Penn State went to Indianapolis to watch him throw at the Combine. And it's like, okay. But then there's kind of this reputation with Will Levis that maybe he rubs people the wrong way. How much, again, you said you met him just briefly yesterday. Mm-hmm. How much because I know you probably did some homework on him talking to other people as well. How much did you get a sense that maybe that reputation's a little overblown?
That's what I felt. I felt like there was it kind of got exacerbated with some of the stories from the draft, the mayonnaise and the banana thing and just kind of stuff that's silly and doesn't really matter.
Sure.
And I think that's contributed to the perception. I'm the same way. Nobody that I've really talked to has said anything negative about him. And really everything that I've heard at his time here so far is that he loves football. He loves preparing. He's made of the right stuff. And so that part makes me excited. And I haven't sat down with him long enough to form that opinion myself. But I think the best thing that I have going and he has going with me is that I don't have any preconceived notions. And him and I get a chance to start from the beginning and build a relationship. And so he can be whoever he wants to be in that regard. And I'm going to let him. So hopefully some of those things are the silly stuff is silly stuff, and he is more about what everyone says he's about. That's what it seems like.
So when it was reported you were getting the job, there was this kind of dig up of all your interviews, and you did an interview before the draft last year where you talked about the offensive line and said that maybe the best offensive lineman was a tackle out of Northwestern who you thought might be more of a guard.
Yeah.
The Titans drafted Peter. They played him at guard last year. There's always been this question about, is Peter going to play guard or is Peter going to play tackle?
Yeah.
I don't know what the draft board looks like. I don't know what the pro board looks like.
Yep.
But is there still a discussion of where Peter may play, or are you set on Peter at guard?
I think there's always a discussion. I don't know. That was just my opinion when we were getting ready for the draft on where he fell. I thought he was an outstanding football player. And a lot of times there's traits involved where that doesn't necessarily translate as great to tackle, especially when you're talking about length and things like that. The edge is a tough place to play sometimes if you don't have those things. Now, his athleticism and movement skills and strength are top-notch. So we'll see. We'll leave that up to as we get the staff together. We'll still evaluate that. I don't want to pin myself in a corner on saying he's just going to be a guard and all of a sudden you see him at tackle. But I felt like when he was coming on the draft, that was probably his best position. Not to say that as we get going and we get to know him and we start practicing that maybe he still can play tackle. He obviously was really good at it at Northwestern. So I don't want to paint myself in a corner.
So you guys have the 7th pick, and if Peter's not your left tackle, you got to go get a left tackle. And I look at a situation when you were in Cincinnati where the offensive line needed a lot of work, and you guys went out in free agency and did it, but you sat there with the 5th pick in the draft, and it was either the really good wide receiver or the really good offensive lineman. And both Sewell and Chase have been really good NFL players.
Yep.
You may be in a similar spot here.
No doubt.
Where there's a really good wide receiver and a really good tackle. Did that experience maybe shape how you view that kind of conundrum?
It did, and I'll preface. I'll give you the full story on how that came to be because I think it's a good story. But I'll preface it by saying that every situation is different.
Sure.
But when I was in Denver, we were built very similarly to how ended up being built in Cincinnati. We had 3 really good receivers and a really fantastic quarterback in Peyton Manning, and so that's how he liked to play. That's the way we played offense. And I just remember in a game, and I think it was probably like in November, we played the Patriots at home, and that was a critical game because we never wanted to have to go to Foxborough in the playoffs, and we knew that they were going to be a contending team. We were going to be a contending team, and so that number 1 seed was really important. And I just remember a game. It's kind of late in the game, got to have it, and we throw a go ball down the right sideline for about 40 yards and a go ball down the left sideline, like within 4 or 5 plays. That puts us in position to win the game because New England's going to play press man coverage and challenge you and make you have to complete the ball and go beat their corners who were pretty good. And we won that game. And that always resonated with me. Like when it came down to having to win the game, we had players on the perimeter that could go win one-on-one matchups.
Kind of like the ball you threw here in the playoffs.
Very similar to the ball we threw here in the playoffs, which brings me to that's the next part of the story is even in a game when we got battered up front and Joe got sacked 9 times and probably hit 15 and we really, outside of one drive and one explosive play, didn't really do much in that game. And we get a turnover late in the game, and now they're going to play 2-man, and Jamar goes and wins versus 2-man and wins the game. And so those moments have always stuck with me. When a push comes to shove, do you want to have someone that can go score touchdowns and go win versus tight coverage? And in that debate, the Sewell-Chase debate, which was, again, 2 players that you knew, whichever one we take is probably going to be a 10-time Pro Bowler, first-team All-Pro style player. And Panay was fantastic, and we loved him. And Jamar was fantastic, and we loved him. And the debate went back and forth, and which one do we need? And I landed on the Jamar Chase side because I saw what he could do for our offense. And I saw Joe throwing to him in college. And so that also helps. Like it's not hard to visualize what it's going to look like. And the difference there to me is like Jamar was an elite player. And in that moment for our team in Cincinnati, the elite player that can score touchdowns versus the elite player that can protect the quarterback with the style of quarterback that we had and the style of offense that we ran, we took the guy that could score touchdowns. And it turned out great for us the next season. Does that mean that that's the same here?
I knew you were going to wrap that up with does that mean that with the 7th pick here, we're going to do the same thing? Yeah. No, because the players are different and I saw that coming.
But that is, there is a philosophy where I tend to lean to the guys that can score touchdowns. Because if you're playing the quarterback position well and playing it right, you can negate some of the issues you have as in pass protection if you're playing on time and throwing the ball accurate and all those things. So that's a long-winded way of saying we'll see. but there is that's a great debate, and it's going to be interesting to see how that shapes up.
So Derrick Henry scored a lot of touchdowns here for the Titans.
He sure did.
He is a free agent. And I do wonder, what the thought is, because it feels like watching him. He thinks right now, at least, that the chapter is closed with him and the Titans. And I would never, if I was hiring a coach, I wouldn't say, hey, you have to re-sign a 30-year-old back who's probably going to cost a significant amount of money because he's as special of a player as he is. But I do wonder, is it just, hey, it ended on a great note for him and he was a great player and, on we go? Or is it, hey, it's something we're certainly considering?
I would certainly consider the option. And he has to obviously want that as well. But he's been the face of the franchise, and he's still a really good ball carrier. And you watch that last game against Jacksonville, and he still looks like Derrick Henry. And so, I think if that's as we get into the roster phase of this here, as we get the staff hired and we get into the roster part, that's a conversation to have, because I do think he is a great player. You always are mindful of how you're building your roster and those position values and where you're spending your money. But Derrick Henry is a fantastic football player, and he's been a pain to play against for the last handful of years. And I'm certainly open to what that could look like.
What do you make of the leadership element there? Because it is a young team, especially on offense, if he's not there.
Yeah, and that's an important part. And I think back sometimes to I wasn't in Cincinnati when it happened, but they released Andrew Whitworth, and probably rightfully so, in the sense that he was 35 years old,
sure.
and they probably felt like it was time. And I wasn't a part of the decision, but when we got there, all anybody ever said was when they released Whitworth, there was a gigantic void in the leadership in the locker room, and we felt that when we got there in 2019, as Witt's going on to the Rams and playing in Super Bowls. And so that part of it was always made me think about, there is a place for veteran players that have really, really deep leadership roles in the locker room, and I don't underestimate that effect on the unit. So those are things that you consider when you're talking about bringing back older players and paying guys. Like, that part is part of the formula.
So I'm going to tell you a story. Last one here. Brian Callahan's with us. I'm going to tell you a story. And everybody listening probably knows this story. Robbie knows this story. But years and years ago, when I first started at the radio station, we had the old general manager of the Titans, Floyd Reese, name on the wall over there. Mm-hmm. He was working there, and we ended up working together for about 5 years. But before we were working together, I had just met the guy. And I grew up a huge Titans fan, and so it's like, this is Floyd Reese. So we're doing our first show together, and I'm just trying to, break the ice because I don't even know him. So I said, this was 2015. The team was terrible. They were 3-13 that year. I go, Floyd, are the Titans going to be any good this year? This might have been April after the draft. And he looked at me and he goes, we don't have a right tackle. I said, that's important, huh? He said, right tackle? I was like, it's pretty important. So the last couple of years, I feel like I've had to tell that story on the radio a bunch. So right tackle is apparently pretty important. I just, I just want you to know that story so I don't have to tell it anymore on the radio.
I'll say this. Anymore, the way the NFL's set up, everybody's usually has at least one dynamic pass rusher. Mm-hmm. Most of them have two. And so if you don't have two tackles, it's going to be hard. And that is an issue for every team in the league, because the defensive line continues to get bigger and faster and stronger.
Well, and they don't let you practice on offensive line anymore.
And it's hard. Exactly right. So you're at a disadvantage from the get-go up front, just from that spot. And so, yes, right tackle is important, and we need as many good tackles as we can find.
Coach, congratulations. Thanks so much for doing this.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, Brian Callahan, Stillman & Company, 102.5, 106.3 The Game.
Vanderbilt basketball lives here.
Hey, this is Jake Lyman, Vanderbilt women's basketball.
Reacting to the Brian Callahan interview there, so a couple of things. First of all, open to bringing Derrick Henry back and says the leadership in the locker room does matter. And that is something that if they don't get it in Derrick Henry, they're going to have to get it in somebody because they don't have it right now on offense. Says he's open to Skoronski at tackle or Skoronski at guard. The problem with that is that training camp is in July, and they need to know when they go into the draft if they're looking for a left tackle or if they're looking for a left guard. They probably need to know that. So I would say that that's probably, I really would like the Titans just to pick one way or the other. And then it sounded to me, for all of you that are, we need to take a left tackle. It seems like where I sit, left tackle, receiver, if they're the same and they're both supposed to be great, I'll go wide receiver. Sounds like he thinks the same way. By the way, Joe texted me, and he says, good interview. Disappointed you didn't own up to driving. The Levis has a bad personality bus for months. When did I say that? I'm the one who talked to Liam Cohen about it and Mark Stoops. No. Revisionist history at its finest. 615-737-1025. We'll get to your reaction. 615-737-1025 here on the Callahan interview. We'll do that next. Stillman and Company. Let's talk about windows for a second. That's right. Window Nation. Winter is here, and it doesn't feel like it outside. It did all last week, but it does not this week. Which means you're going to get that cold air when it's cold, and you're going to get the sun banging on it. So it's going to be cold outside, times like now when the sun goes down, and the sun's going to hit those windows, and it's going to make your house a furnace. And you do not want that. So talk to the pros at Window Nation, because replacing those old windows is easier and more affordable than you think. No interest for 5 years and 50% off all window styles. Do not wait. Go to windownation.com. Again, it's better for your home because it'll help you on your energy bills, and it's better for your home because it will raise the value. Whenever you go to turn around and sell that home, you'll be glad that you did this. That's right. Window Nation, again, no interest for 5 years and 50% off all window styles. 866-90-NATION, windownation.com. Stillman and Company, 102.5, 106.3 The Game, streaming live on Twitter, Twitch, YouTube, and Facebook live from the Spring Hill Heating and Cooling Studios on a Fireball Hot Take Friday. So we did just sit down with Titans head coach Brian Callahan. We will podcast that here at some point. We will also, if you missed it, have it for you at 4:45. So be listening for that. But, I do want to get to your phones, your reaction. Joe Rexrow does have a lengthy rebuttal, by the way, Ian, about about me driving the misinformation bus on Will Levis. He said, quote, I talked to Liam Cohen, blah, blah, blah. You also talked to a source who questioned him and his character. You played up all the pre-draft BS information. You bitched about some Instagram post like he had just committed a felony. I do remember there was an Instagram post I didn't like, but I can't remember.
Something about I want to say it was the shirtless pictures.
No, that was Phil Sims.
Oh, that was Phil Sims. That's right. Yeah, he didn't like the pictures. And then someone didn't like Rich Gannon had some weird comment I think we played.
Yeah, don't bring all the sisters and girlfriend and mom to the draft. Just bring one.
Yeah.
That was weird. Yeah, that has nothing to do with me. Joe says, you dismissed my story on him that included talking to more than 20 people on and off the record as, quote, talking to his parents. That is true. I did do that.
Fair points by Joe.
They're very fair points. He said, we had a screaming match on Jared versus Joe about this stupid stuff, and now you want to say someone else is being a history revisionist. Classic. I mean, look, I was cool with all I remember, and I'm not trying to defend myself here. Or actually, I am. I'm not trying to say Joe's wrong here. All I remember about Levis pre-draft was that I supported the idea of taking him at 11. And you all went crazy. That's all I remember. Hey, he was terrible against Tennessee, Jared. You're right, he was. Even though the first pass guy dropped, second one threw right in the hands, guy got hit, ball popped in the air, was intercepted, run the other way, and then they're chasing the game from there. But I supported taking him at 11. And I think they would like to have that extra year had they taken him at 11. But you all got mad about it. Joe can say about Joe can say, oh, yeah, you played up all of that. I mean, I did talk to people that know Levis, like going back to high school. I didn't talk to a ton of people, but I did talk to people that were like, I don't know. 615-737-1025, your phones, though, on what you heard from Brian Callahan. Said, good interview, Texter says. Would have liked to hear more about the offensive line plan, a mix of old versus new, with old being free agents and new being the draft. So here's the thing about asking those kind of questions. I feel like we got a good idea when he was talking about the decision to draft Jamar Chase, about how he values the guys that make the plays on the outside and the explosiveness and those kind of things more than he values protecting the quarterback, which he also brought up in his press conference in a different way, talking about how it's not just the offensive line. It is, the quarterback's got to get the ball out on time. The receivers have to be open at the right time. And so he brought that up about how, you can find guys to protect the quarterback and you can get the ball out of the quarterback's hands and you can so on and so forth. So I think he kind of told you. I mean, he didn't say it directly because he never would say that directly. My gut is they're planning to do a lot of that with free agency, which is why I go back to Skoronski and I'm like, if Peter can be a starting left tackle in the NFL, and I have no idea if he can or if he can't. The problem is they didn't try him there last year, so they don't know if he can or if he can't. But if Peter could be a starting left tackle in the NFL, it would solve so many of your problems because there are so many guys who are available in free agency this year that are interior offensive linemen. Like Tyler Biotish, the center of the Cowboys, really good player. But there's like 5 or 6 centers in free agency, so you should be able to get one of them. Then there's Dotson of the Rams, who's a really good guard. There's Hunt of the 49ers, who's a guard. And so if these guys don't get franchise tagged, and I don't think they will, you're going to have to pay top dollar at the guard market for somebody like that. But I'd rather do that and then use my draft picks to try to get the next A.J. Brown. That's what I believe. But again, on what he was saying, he's not going to say oh, yeah, we're definitely going to take a receiver. Oh, yeah, we're looking first of all, they probably haven't even gone through the boards yet. Like the free agent board and the draft board, and it's not like he has his own board. Like their scouts have the boards, and they probably haven't even totally gone over it yet. But I understand what you're saying. One texter to the text line says a lot of people are saying good information, which I like. Texter says, you whined about Levis after he touched his face. I did look at that. He's the quarterback. One texter says, you also tried to diagnose him with anxiety, which is weird in his own right. Well, I'll just tell you, when I watch him play football, I can see somebody who's got the perfectionist qualities of somebody that's got anxiety, where, again, it's not like he's nervous to go out there and throw the ball. It is the anxiety that pushes him late in these games, like the Steelers game and the Buccaneers game, where he's like, I'm going to go win the game. And it's like, slow down, young fella. Like, you got to let those things come to you. You've got the natural gifts to be able to do it, as we saw in the Dolphins game. But be okay. Texture says, I could be completely wrong, but I am intrigued by the way that Brian Callahan talks about player evaluations. I thought Vrabel always talked about how players need to work hard to earn a spot, and Callahan seems to look at it more of how can they get good players to impact the game the right way. I mean, I still think all of the coach stuff, and they're very different messengers, which I do think is needed here. You know, I do think that whenever you've got a coach who's a hard ass and it doesn't work, you go and you get a guy who is not as much of authoritarian. And then when you fire a guy who's kind of all over the place and it looks like he doesn't have control of his team, you want to go hire Belichick because it's like, we want to organize this right now. So I think there's a little bit of that here. But I do think that every coach tells draft picks, hey, it doesn't matter if you're picked in the first round or if you're picked in the 7th round, you're still on the team. Look at Puka Nacua. Look what he did. They always are going to try to do that kind of stuff because they want to motivate the young guys and they don't want the high draft picks to get fat and happy. So I don't think there's really a disconnect there. I got to say this on the Vrabel thing because I wanted Vrabel fired and a lot of you didn't. But I got to say this right now. A lot of you guys have turned this, and I see a lot of these texts into the text message, or texts into the text line. I see a lot of these about, Vrabel did this, and Vrabel did that, and Vrabel would have said this, and he was a mean cuss, and Callahan's interview was so much better. And somebody asked, what was your first interview like with Vrabel compared to your first interview with Callahan? Well, with Callahan, I sat down with him. So it's a different, one-on-one kind of setting than Vrabel when he came on the show on Jared and the GM. That being said, when Vrabel came on the show on Jared and the GM, I could hear it through the phone that he was like, interview 432 today. And I know that Brian Callahan's done 5 interviews today. So, I didn't get that sense when talking to him. But the one thing I'm going to say on the Vrabel front is Vrabel wasn't the worst guy in the world. It's okay to say, hey, Vrabel did a good job. Vrabel was terrible with the coaching staff in the end, and he was too arrogant for his own good, and the Titans are moving on in a different direction, and that you can like the direction they're moving in, which I do. But it doesn't mean that Mike Vrabel's the worst guy in the world, and he's the Grinch that stole Christmas. And yes, you are right to feel angry about everybody in the media that said, you guys are stupid if you want Mike Vrabel fired because everyone in the league will fire their coach to hire him because none of that has happened. But let's not pretend like he's the meanest guy who ever lived because it's starting to turn like that, and I'm not sure I totally like that. JD says, was very refreshing to hear an interview from a pleasant person in charge of our football team. Didn't feel like he was trying to belittle or smart-mouth about anything. It's also very nice of him to take ownership of his relationship with Levis, and thus, it sounds encouraging. Somebody texted into the text line and said that listening to that interview kind of felt like listening to the Predators. And I would say it did have some very Barry Trotz vibes to it, which I like the fact that when Barry comes on our show, Barry sits down and we talk. I think that it makes it easier sometimes, but Barry will shoot you straight. And I think as of right now, Brian Callahan's shooting us straight. I have noticed one thing he does do, though, Ian. But I'm not going to say it because I don't want him to stop doing it.
Okay.
But I'll tell you during a break. People in the text line are going to be mad about that.
Yeah, probably.
Corey Curtis, News 2, will join us next. 615-737-1025 here on the program. Let's take a call first, though. Cam has been waiting patiently, and he is up next on Brian Callahan. What's up, Cam?
Oh, so, number one, I was just thinking the same thing. It really did have, that interview that you just did with Barry not even a week or so ago. That's what it felt like, number one. And it is refreshing to have, not the pissy pants thing, but I thought it was really telling that he said, when you asked him about would you go, tackle or would you go receiver if you were in that situation, and he referenced Cincinnati giving up 9 sacks, but they still won the game. Mm-hmm. So I thought, that tells you everything you need to know, right?
My guess is, and I appreciate your call, Cam, my guess is from that interview, from that Q&A, that he probably was in the room, clearly part of the decision process in Cincinnati where they don't have as many scouts, they don't have a very big front office, and they were discussing, what do we think here, Sewell or Chase? And I bet you that he said, hey, when I was in Denver, we got by on the offensive line because Peyton wanted the playmakers on the outside. He valued the playmakers on the outside more than he valued the line. And that's how we beat New England. So if that's what we did for Peyton, let's do that for Joe. And I think that's the point there, was that that's what Peyton wanted, and he took that from Peyton and probably applied it in the Cincinnati situation, which I find encouraging. Corey Curtis, News 2, will join us next. His reaction to what he's heard from Brian Callahan here on Stillman and Company. Twice Daily wants to send you to Italy. That's right. Buy any made-to-order Italian sub and use your rewards app to get entered to win. Every sub is a chance to win, and mobile-ordered Italian subs count as 2 times entries. Visit twicedaily.com/sweepstakes for more info. Twice Daily's made-to-order offerings allow you to get exactly what you want when you want it. That's right. So customize all your sandwiches and bagels however you'd like. Make it yours, and they'll make it fresh. Download the Twice Daily app today. Enjoy the loyalty program to unlock special discounts, savings, and so much more. It pays to be a member with Twice Daily. We earn points and save money with every visit. Get what you crave at Twice Daily. If you're looking for convenience, Twice Daily has you covered. Twice Daily, that's my spot. Fresh all day. Okay, I spent too much talking in the last segment, which means we're kind of late for Corey Curtis, so let's get right to Corey Curtis, News 2, who joins us on this Fireball Hot Take Friday. Corey, your reaction to Brian Callahan's hiring, the Titans restructuring, your thoughts of him, them, go for it.
That's kind of all-encompassing, dude. You know what? I think the exciting part is, if you're a Titans fan, is they have a clearly thought-out plan in place, and they got it all in place and kind of dropped it all at once and said, here you go. Here are the answers to all your questions on who's going to report to who's going to be in charge of what. And I thought that was well prepared. And I've been here for the introduction of all 5 new head coaches that have been with the Titans. And I thought he was easily the most prepared and the best communicator of all of them when they started. Now, will he win as many games as some of them? I don't know. We're going to wait and see. But when you just talk about preparation for a press conference and apparently preparation for a job, I thought he was outstanding. Now they got to get him some players, and he's got to get some coaches. I think they did what they wanted to do. And I think that's important. They didn't strike out on candidates. Who was it? Was it the Giants who wound up on Dan Reeves with like their 7th choice or something like that?
I forgot about that. That was a long time ago.
Yeah, but so you get your first choice, and you were right about Mike Vrabel, as far as the trade market goes. So I just think for as big of a beating as they've taken in the national media, I don't know. To me, it looks like they've done a lot of things right.
So I think a couple things here. I think, number one, the communication thing you brought up is absolutely true. I mean, I think that guy is and I don't say this loosely, but you covered Floyd when he was GM, and you got to know Floyd when he was on the radio. He had this innate ability to be able to talk about something, make you feel like you really man, the GM just said this. And then you walked out of it, and there was no little nugget in there. He had an unbelievable ability to do that. You know exactly what I'm talking about.
Yep.
I think this guy's got it. And I think this organization, especially after Vrabel and Robinson, but really just maybe in today's era, I think this organization needs that.
Well, moving into a new stadium, I mean, look, he's young, he's good-looking, he's a communicator, he's not offensive to anyone. He's very approachable. Yes, I mean, I absolutely. It's kind of a reset that this organization and that this city needed, and it's going to be interesting. I think I've tried describing it to people as he's today's NFL head coach. When you look at the other, I mean, look, there's a reason that Belichick and Vrabel don't have jobs right now, because they're yesterday's coaches. They're the Mike Ditkas of the world. And these guys, like Brian Callahan, are today's head coach. They're Sean McVay, they're Kyle Shanahan, they're Matt LaFleur. I mean, he fits right in line with those guys.
Well, not only that, and I said this to him, and I said this yesterday, because as far as listening to a press conference and saying that's my coach, everybody, Jeremy Pruitt had one of those. But I feel like society's changed, right? Mm-hmm. And COVID, really highlighted this when all these jobs that had been furloughed or laid off all opened back up for business and nobody wanted them. And it was why does nobody want this job? Because nobody wants to work a job, for bad pay where they're going to be treated like garbage. And my grandparents came from the Great Depression era. And I think in that era, it was you should be lucky that you have a job, thankful that you have a job, and if they tell you at your job to go eat nails, you freaking eat nails because you should be thankful that you have a job. And that was 90 years ago. We don't live in that society anymore. And I think the Vrabel-Belichick way of coaching, Corey, is that, hey, you should be lucky to be on my staff. You should be lucky to be my assistant social media director. And I think this guy is more hey, you're the assistant social media director, but at some point, something's going to come up, and there's going to be something that you're going to help us win a game some way or another with what you do.
Yeah. I mean, look, there's a couple ways to look at people in society. Some people look at people who work at McDonald's and say, how dare they ask for $15 an hour? Some people look at them and say, you know what, everybody's got value. If you don't want to pay them $15 an hour, you go flip your own burger. And I think he is someone who looks at everyone having value. And look, I'm not saying Mike Vrabel didn't assign value, to everyone, but there's a level of respect that is portrayed. And, the level of respect Brian Callahan portrayed was pretty heavy for everyone, and that includes everyone in his past and now everyone in his future.
What do you think about Rand getting full say? Well,
I'm a fan of the older model, and that's the GM and the coaches took it. That's the way look, I know that's not an absolute, but I just think that tends to be the best way to do it. You let people do their jobs, okay? You have talent evaluators and player acquisition people. Let them do their jobs. You go coach. That's your job. When you take on too much, it's usually a problem. It's not always a problem, but I would say 90+% of the time, it's a problem. Now, it's not perfect, but he was hired to do this job. So I'm a fan of letting people do their jobs. I'm also a fan of taking some of it off of his plate. Historically, tight GMs, these huge, all-encompassing jobs that have included stuff that a lot of other GMs don't have to worry about. And now Rand can focus on players, which is what this team needs. So I like the breakup in the power structure at the top with him and Chad Brinker, in that those guys can focus more on what it is they do and do well, just like Brian Callahan talked about doing with players. I think the front office the same way is smart. And organization,
Corey's phone's killing me. Corey, where are you calling from? You calling from, like, prison?
I'm at the YMCA. I just want that baby screening.
Oh, my goodness. No, your phone's your service. You got to upgrade from Cricket or whatever it is you got.
I've got Verizon, man. I'm sorry.
No, you're good. You're good. Okay, so the last one for you until we get to your hot take. Yeah. What do you think is kind of like the next step here for the Titans? I know, like, get a coaching staff, but is there anything in particular that you're focused on right now?
Yeah, I mean, yes, coaching staff, number one, but I'm curious, what they're going to do at number 7. I mean, because you would think it's going to be tackle, but I'm not 100% set on that. I know a lot of people are, and I get it. I mean, look, I'd love to see Joe Alt out there at left tackle for the next 12 years. But Malik Neighbors can really go, and so can the kid from Washington. And I like guys who score touchdowns.
You didn't hear Callahan on our show last hour, did you?
No, I didn't. I was on the treadmill.
Okay, so I don't want to speak for anybody else, but I get the vibe that, like, if Neighbors is as good as I think he is, and it sounds like you think he is, and it's Neighbors or a left tackle there, I think he's taking Neighbors.
Is that the whole Jamar Chase scenario?
I asked him about that, and he was basically like, well, when Peyton Manning was the quarterback in Denver, we beat New England because they would press our receivers, and Manning hit 2 go balls, one on the outside to the left and one on the outside to the right. Then when we got to Cincinnati, we decided to go with Joe because I believe that the guys who score touchdowns are more valuable than the guys that block for the quarterback. And he talked about the go ball that they threw at the end of the playoff game. He's like, yep, we got Joe hit 9 times. And still, Jamar Chase made a big play to win the game. So I think if Neighbors is as good as we think, I think they may be going that route.
You can make the argument either way. I totally get it. But, I mean, when you look at this Titans team, what's one of the things that they've lacked historically, outside of the Derrick Masons and A.J. Browns that they've had, which is just a handful. And that's guys who can win and get separation, like quality separation for the quarterback and do it quickly. And so I'd love to see a Chase, Justin Jefferson type of guy, in this offense for Will Levis to throw to, and that's with Hopkins and with Treylon Burks, because I think good helps everybody, and I think it helps the quarterback especially. I'm old school, so I'm all about the offensive line, but I think I'm evolving some, maybe not in a good way or not, but I understand that speed kills, and the Titans don't have any, and I think they need to be prepared to invest to get it.
Last one for you, Fireball. Hot Take Friday. What's your hot take?
You know, I know it's pie in the sky. It is, and I'm just riding the hopium train right now. I think Derrick Henry's coming back.
Ooh, do you?
I think Amy's going to want him back. I think, you know, because we're talking about the PR of the team, and you don't sign guys for PR, but, you know, we're talking about a couple-year transition with this team. So maybe he doesn't want to come back. Maybe he wants to go somewhere where he thinks, you know, he's got a better shot of winning the Super Bowl in the next 2 years. But I think the team could see value in having him help lead them in this transition. And, you know, understanding that he's not going to be the 350 carry guy. It's the same stuff we talked about before. But, you know, also you got a GM who was a running back and values the running back. And, you know, maybe that plays into it. So I'm going to hold out hope for what we always dream of, and that's the guy starting and finishing with one team.
Ian, would you like to read for Corey what our topic coming up next is on the grid today?
It says, I think Brian Callahan would prefer Derrick Henry back if they can figure out the money.
Oh, 2 years, $10 million, right?
I think somewhere around. I don't think Derrick's going out in the market and getting $6 to $8 million from anybody.
No, he's not. He's just got to be realistic about that.
So with that, Corey, you led me right into my next segment. Great stuff. Appreciate you. Have a great weekend.
Sorry, my phone stunk. Let's blame the Brentwood YMCA.
I do blame them. Corey Curtis, News 2, as always, joining us on the program. Please don't be mad at us, Brentwood YMCA. I have no idea. I've never been to the Brentwood YMCA. I'm sure it's great. Coming up next, what Brian Callahan said about Derrick Henry, and the one thing that is not nothing, that Pro Football Focus and the analytics department and everything else they don't talk about, but I'm telling you it's not nothing. We'll do that next here on the program. Hiller Plumbing, Heating, Cooling, and Electrical. My guys, I'm probably going to get Hiller out here next week with an electrical issue, and I bet they will take great care of it because for the last 6 years they have taken great care of my house for everything. That's right. I love Hiller Plumbing, Heating, Cooling, and Electrical. They've been with us the whole way. They will treat you right with 100% satisfaction of happy you'll be. Your service is free. And I know this, again, because they do work at my home. And Hiller also offers true transparency pricing, which means that they will line item every part of the job up front. So instead of them coming out and all of a sudden saying, hey, here's 20 grand. No. They're going to say, hey, this is what we saw here. This is what we saw here. This is what we saw here. What do you want us to do? And again, I know this because I use them. That's Hiller Plumbing, Heating, Cooling, and Electrical, proud supporters of the Preds, the Vols, and Vandy. Hiller, call the Happy Face Truck today.
I would certainly consider the option, and he has to obviously want that as well. But he's been the face of the franchise, and he's still a really good ball carrier. And you watch that last game against Jacksonville, and he still looks like Derrick Henry. And so, I think if that's as we get into the roster phase of this here, as we get the staff hired and we get into the roster part, that's a conversation to have, because I do think he is a great player. You always are mindful of how you're building your roster and those position values and where you're spending your money. But, I mean, Derrick Henry is a fantastic football player, and he's been a pain to play against for the last handful of years. And, I'm certainly open to what that could look like.
Brian Callahan says, hey, look, I'm not ruling out Derrick Henry coming back. And Corey thinks Derrick Henry is coming back. And I actually think Derrick Henry might be coming back too. And I was thinking about, the reasons to and to not bring Derrick back. The first thing is, I don't know how important the money is to Derrick. When J.J. Watt got his release in Houston, everybody talked about J.J. wanted to go win a ring, so he might go to Tampa or the Chiefs or one of those kind of teams. And then he went to the Arizona Cardinals. And it's like, why did he go to the Arizona Cardinals? Why? Because they paid him real freaking money. That's why. And I think with these guys, winning a championship is great. I do. I think they care about winning a championship. Derrick said on Bussin' with the Boys, he cares about winning a championship. But you got to respect me with my money, too. Like, you got to respect me when it comes to the money. And so I don't know, Corey brought up Amy as part of the reason why he thinks Derrick Henry's coming back. Now, I said if I owned this team, I would not tell the head coach and the general manager what they have to do when it comes to Derrick Henry. But Derrick Henry is an owner decision. Like, they don't make the decision to close the door on Derrick Henry without talking to the owner. And if they're going to make an offer to Derrick Henry and Derrick Henry doesn't want to entertain the offer or doesn't want to take the offer, Derrick, you need to go talk to Amy about that. Before you do that, that's about, because, again, face of the franchise. But the other thing that I think matters, I really think it matters, and all these analytic nerd gurus that stick Joe Mauer in the Baseball Hall of Fame, even though 99.9% of sports fans don't even know who Joe Mauer is, they don't take into leadership into account. And when I was talking about the defense of Vrabel having not lost the team, I think back to that last game. And they played their butts off in that last game. But I don't necessarily give Vrabel all the credit for that, because I think the team and the offensive line played their butts off in that last game for Derrick Henry because of how much they respect him. And so, again, on the leadership front, this is what Brian Callahan said about that. What do you make of the leadership element there? Because it is a young team, especially on offense, if he's not there.
Yeah, and that's an important part. And, I think back sometimes to I wasn't in Cincinnati when it happened, but they released Andrew Whitworth, and probably rightfully so, in the sense that, he was 35 years old.
Sure.
And they probably felt like it was time. And I wasn't a part of the decision, but when we got there, all anybody ever said was when they released Whitworth, there was a gigantic void in the leadership in the locker room. And we felt that when we got there in 2019, as Witt's going on to the Rams and playing in Super Bowls. And so that part of it was always made me think about there is a place for veteran players that have really, really deep leadership roles in the locker room. And I don't underestimate that effect on the unit. So those are things that you consider when you're talking about bringing back older players.
I mean, it sounds like he's taking it seriously there. Now, it doesn't mean they're going to bring back Derrick Henry, but that's not nothing. That leadership that he brings, and the fact that, look, if Tajay Spears is carrying the ball, Tajay Spears is a good player. And I guarantee you that they will have plans for Tajay Spears, regardless of if Derrick Henry's here or if Derrick Henry's not here. And I think they'll have some really good plans for Tajay Spears. I think maybe like a poor man's McCaffrey, with how they're going to try to get him the ball. Now, he doesn't run the routes like McCaffrey, which makes it kind of hard to be that. But they're going to use Spears because right now he's the best weapon on that offense. So it's not about, taking away touches from Spears or if Spears isn't ready, but does Spears carry the stick for everybody else the way Derrick Henry does? And the answer is no. And again, he talked about, hey, we got to Cincinnati, and there was no leadership in that locker room. And they had to go out and buy it. They had to buy the guys like Ted Karras, and they had to buy Alex Kappa, and they had to buy like those offensive linemen. Now, I think Joe, who is a tremendous leader, and I love Joe Burrow, so any chance I get to talk him up, I probably will. I think that Joe Burrow's a great leader, but it definitely takes some time. And I don't think these guys are trying to lose right away. 615-737-1025 is our phone number if you want to weigh in. 615-737-1025 on our program. We'll get to your phones. Plus, I do wonder this. I got a thought on the games this weekend that I want to get to, because we haven't touched on those yet, and these are still some great games. And so we'll do that next. 615-737-1025. And the other thing that kind of hurts my heart a little bit this week in the NFL, Stillman and Company, 1025-1063 The Game. Let me tell everybody the MTSU basketball. That's right. Tune into 93.3 Classic Hits as MTSU basketball takes on FIU at home. Pre-game at 4:30, tip-off at 5. Coverage is also available on the 93.3 Classic Hits app and at 933classichits.com.
Just looking at what he did in college, and then the Ravens organization and how much success they've had my entire life, I knew that he was going to put him in the right position to win. And we were going to be playing a lot of big games, AFC Championship, playoff games, whatever that was. And so it's cool to see that we're finally here. We're finally playing in our first playoff game against each other, and it's going to be a great challenge.
I don't like competing against him at all. But, yeah, I mean, he's a great quarterback. Definitely a Hall of Famer. It's not even it's a no-brainer. He's definitely a Hall of Famer. But it's just, I believe it's just two greats, up-and-coming greats just going toe-to-toe, like a heavyweight fight, heavyweight matchup. That's just what I see.
Normally I don't like it when somebody refers to themselves as a great, but he's not wrong. I mean, this is a heavyweight fight with the two quarterbacks on Sunday in the AFC game. And I bet if TV had their choice here, Fox had the early window last year, CBS had the late window, so they flip-flop each year. But if they had their way, they'd put the AFC game late, and it would get mega ratings. I mean, mega. This is a big one. And I've been thinking about it for both guys. I love Tom Brady. And I still think Tom Brady is the greatest quarterback who ever lived. But Patrick Mahomes might get there one day. I'm not going to be one of these guys like my dad and Michael Jordan, who LeBron could score 10,000 points in a game, and my dad wouldn't care. Michael's still better than LeBron. Now, I think Michael's better than LeBron, too, but I'm open to the idea that at some point, someday, there can be somebody better than Michael, and my dad is not. Like, there will be nobody ever who is better than Michael Jordan to my dad. But I'm open to that. As much as I love Brady, I'm open to it. But if Mahomes keeps winning with that offense that they have right now, if Mahomes wins that game, because that Ravens defense is freaking nasty, if he beats the Ravens on the road with that defense against that quarterback, the way he's playing, I mean, what more can you say about Mahomes? We're talking about, what would that be, 4 out of 5 years in the Super Bowl? I mean, that's insane. That's like Jim Kelly, except he actually wins them. Then there's Lamar. And look, I know they're in the AFC Championship game for the first time, but C.J. Stroud at this point ain't exactly Josh Allen or Joe Burrow or even Aaron Rodgers. So this is kind of the big one for Lamar. And with all this stink that he raised this offseason about that fully guaranteed contract, and just as brutal as those negotiations were and everything else, and he finally got what he wanted, well, I'm going to give Lamar some credit because he has showed up this year. Has showed up and has shown out. And if he wins this game, and I have been hesitant to put Lamar, and I would name him league MVP if I had to call, but I have been hesitant to stick Lamar in the group with the elites. If he wins this one, I think he's there. And you can't say that he can't win the big one. And I know that, again, it's not the Super Bowl that he would be winning, and they would still have to beat a San Francisco for a second time or Detroit, but I think getting there is probably enough to say, hey, this guy's got that juice. Because Joe Burrow got to the Super Bowl and played great in the Super Bowl, and nobody is questioning Joe Burrow's juice, except for one moron on Twitter earlier this week talking to me. Now, there's another thing I got to talk about here that hurts my heart in the NFL. Is Bill Belichick done? Like, I think he might be. It's one thing for Mike Vrabel to sit out this upcoming season, eat ice cream on the couch because the Titans are going to pay him $10 million to do so, and then turn around next year and take over the Jacksonville Jaguars if they have a bad year and fire Doug Peterson, or take over the Buffalo Bills if they don't win the Super Bowl and fire Sean McDermott, or take over the Dallas Cowboys if Jerry Jones has enough of Mike McCarthy. Vrabel's in his 40s. Bill's 72. If Bill doesn't get a job this year, you mean to tell me that somebody is all of a sudden going to wake up next year at 73 years old and hire Bill Belichick? I don't think so. I think this might be it for Bill. And it hurts my heart. And I don't want Bill to coach my team. And I get why Bill is still out there and nobody wants him. Bill is an old curmudgeon who hasn't won a lot lately, was terrible with the offense at the end there in New England, and quite frankly, got shown up by Tom Brady. But I still want Bill in the league. I still want to watch Bill on TV. I still want to see Bill break the wins record. I want Bill in the NFL. And you know how the NFL sometimes nudges teams like, hey, we'd prefer. Like, it'd be nice if they could nudge a team into hiring Bill. I think where this comes from me is, remember how we said no sacred cows on this show, but we said that we would never we were never going to fire John Robinson on this program because the old man was John Robinson's biggest supporter, and the old man would have never stood for that. And so I was never going to come on the air and say they need to fire John Robinson, even if it got to a point to where I thought they should. Now, they fired him before I thought they should fire him, so I never had that problem. But I had said, that's the one sacred cow of this program, and I said it up front. Bill is not a sacred cow to me, but I do know he would be to the old man. And I think that part of the reason why I am just so sad about the idea of Bill Belichick not coaching next year is because I think about how much it would have hurt the old man to see the way things fell apart for Bill in New England at the end and to see Bill just laying out there in the abyss. And the truth is, when the old man was out there in the abyss, it was Bill who brought him to New England. And so, again, not that it matters what I think, and the old man's been gone for 3 years, but I do think that, it sucks that Bill Belichick is probably not going to be coaching a team next year. And I get it. He's 72 years old. He coaches the wrong side of the ball, and things have not been rosy in New England. And not only is Bill not getting a job, Pete Carroll's not getting a job, and Pete Carroll's team's been winning games. But, again, what I wanted for my team was the guru offensive coordinator with the tight pants and the latte. Oh, my God, Ian, guess what?
What happened?
When we sat down with Callahan today, Callahan came in, Oilers ball cap, had on tight blue jeans, and guess what he was holding?
Big play sheet?
No.
Latte?
He had a coffee in his hand.
Okay.
He had a coffee. He had the latte. So that's what, and I wanted that. So when everybody else around the league is hiring that, it's like, I get it. I get it. When everybody around the league is hiring it, I get it. Because that's what I wanted. But I still want Bill in the league, just not on my team. 615-737-1025 is our phone number. 615-737-1025. That's funny. 615-737-1025. Our text line can sometimes be a very funny place. Coming up next, one of the more revealing things about Brian Callahan from today's interview. We'll get to that coming up. FanDuel Sportsbook is my official sportsbook app. If you've been watching the NFL playoffs from the sideline, there is no time to waste any more to get in the game than to do so right now with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. New customers bet this Sunday's conference championship games with $150 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. FanDuel has so many ways for you to pick up a W. Again, I'm not touching that Ravens and Chiefs game until I have to in six-pack picks today. I have no idea who's going to win that game. I do feel pretty confident about San Francisco. And I just think a dome team going outdoors and Detroit's good, but they're not great, and San Francisco probably is. I just feel confident about San Francisco. So if you want to follow my pick, go to FanDuel right now. Get started with $150 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. Just visit FanDuel.com/JGM to join today. That's FanDuel.com/JGM and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. 21 and over in present Tennessee. First online real money wager. Only $10 first deposit required. Bonus issue is non-withdrawable bonus bets that expire 7 days after receipt. Restrictions apply. See terms at sportsbook.fanduel.com. Gambling problem? Call the Tennessee Red Line at 1-800-889-9789. Stillman and Company, 102.5, 106.3 The Game, streaming live on Twitter, Twitch, YouTube, and Facebook live from the Spring Hill Heating and Cooling Studios on a Fireball Hot Take Friday. So Brian Callahan sat down with us, new Titans head coach, earlier today, and there were a lot of different topics we hit on, like whether it was Derrick Henry or Peter Skoronski at left tackle or left guard, or the atmosphere in the building, or Will Levis and the development and all that kind of stuff. But there was one thing in particular I was really fascinated to hear him talk about, and then after I heard him talk about it, I was like, okay. And that is, with the 7th pick in the 2024 draft, the Tennessee Titans are going to have a choice of a tackle or a receiver. It is almost impossible to imagine that there won't be that choice of a tackle or a receiver, right? Quarterback is going to go 1, 2, 3, and so those guys are gone. Now you're at 4. There's 3 receivers, Marvin Harrison Jr., Roma Dunze out of Washington, and Malik Neighbors out of LSU, and there's 2 tackles, Fashanu out of Penn State, and Alt, who everybody around here is in love with apparently, out of Notre Dame. And so the guess would be that one receiver probably goes at 4, and I think the Chargers have the 5th pick, and they've got a left tackle in Rashawn Slater, so they probably go receiver 2. So you could be sitting there, with no receiver, or more likely the tackle might go 6, and then here you go. So they may be on the board at that spot. There's no way to know, but again, it has to be discussed. And so, has there ever been a team that had no offensive line, that had a young quarterback, that even though they had no offensive line, they drafted a receiver at the top of the draft? Oh, yeah, the Cincinnati Bengals in 2021. So I asked Brian Callahan about that decision, and here's what he said.
Every situation is different.
Sure.
But when I was in Denver, we were built very similarly to how we ended up being built in Cincinnati. We had 3 really good receivers and a really fantastic quarterback in Peyton Manning. And so that's how he liked to play. That's the way we played offense. And I just remember in a game, and I think it was probably like in November, we played the Patriots at home. And that was a critical game because we never wanted to have to go to Foxborough in the playoffs. And we knew that they were going to be a contending team. We were going to be a contending team. And so that number 1 seed was really important. And I just remember a game, it's kind of late in the game, got to have it, and we throw a go ball down the right sideline for about 40 yards and a go ball down the left sideline, like within 4 or 5 plays, that puts us in position to win the game because New England's going to play press man coverage and challenge you and make you have to complete the ball and go beat their corners who were pretty good. And we won that game. And that always resonated with me. Like, when it came down to having to win the game, we had players on the perimeter that could go win one-on-one matchups.
Kind of like the ball you threw here in the playoffs.
Very similar to the ball we threw here in the playoffs.
Okay. So he's saying, hey, what we did in Denver was Peyton. We built it that way in Denver, and that's how we ended up building it in Cincinnati. So what about Chase versus Sewell? And notice how right there he talked about receivers, didn't mention a word about offensive line. Play the cut.
Even in a game where we got battered up front and Joe got sacked 9 times and probably hit 15 and, we really, outside of one drive and one explosive play, didn't really do much in that game. And we get a turnover late in the game, and now they're going to play 2-man, and Jamar goes and wins versus 2-man and wins the game. And so those moments have always stuck with me. When a push comes to shove, do you want to have someone that can go score touchdowns and go win versus tight coverage? And in that debate, the Sewell-Chase debate, which was, again, 2 players that you knew, whichever one we take is probably going to be a 10-time Pro Bowler, first-team All-Pro style player. And Panay was fantastic, and we loved him. And Jamar was fantastic, and we loved him. And the debate went back and forth, and which one do we need? And I landed on the Jamar Chase side because I saw what he could do for our offense. And I saw Joe throwing to him in college. And so that also helps. Like, it's not hard to visualize what it's going to look like. Mm-hmm. And the difference there to me is, like, Jamar was an elite player. And in that moment for our team in Cincinnati, the elite player that can score touchdowns versus the elite player that can protect the quarterback with the style of quarterback that we had and the style of offense that we ran, we took the guy that could score touchdowns. And it turned out and great for us the next season. I tend to lean to the guys that can score touchdowns because if you're playing the quarterback position well and playing it right, you can negate some of the issues you have as in pass protection if you're playing on time and throwing the ball accurate and all those things.
If it's even with that pick at number 7, it sounds to me like he's going wide receiver. And guess what? That's where I sit too. Now, he did say, both at the beginning of the answer the beginning of the answer after the question I asked and at the very end, he did say and highlight that, every situation is different. That giant asterisk like CNBC puts on every show they have about talking to your financial advisor before you make a sale or a purchase based upon what you see on CNBC. Just like when you use new exercise equipment and it says, if you've got heart problems, check with your doctor first. He gave out the little disclaimers there. And I don't know if it will be even because they could have a grade of 7. Let's say that Roma Dunze is there and both tackles are there. A Dunze could have a grade of 6.85 out of 7. Now, they're really out of 10, but Floyd says nobody gets a 10, and John Elway gets a 9. So 6.87 for Roma Dunze. He says Eddie George is like a 7. 6.87 for a Dunze, 7.2 for Alt. Well, now, okay, Alt seems like he's the better player, so I'll go ahead and take him. But if they're even, and again, the one thing he kept hammering there was that Jamar Chase was an elite player, and Jamar Chase in college was an elite player. And I do think that Roma Dunze, after what I saw in that Sugar Bowl, I do think Roma Dunze might be an elite player. And I certainly love Malik Neighbors. But if that elite wide receiver is there, and Joe Alt is the elite tackle, and they're both there with the 7th pick, and they may not be, but if they are, it sounds to me like Brian Callahan would take the receiver. Now, here's what else I found fascinating in that, which was he kind of talked there at the end about the Sewell Chase debate and how he was like, he landed on the Chase side of that. And he said, look, with Panay, we loved him. And there was a big debate. Ian, what's the word that the Titans never shut up about that's starting to drive everybody crazy, that they talk about all the time? I see you're on the phone. So
collaboration.
There you go. Collaboration. It sounds to me like Cincinnati did all right, hands in the air. Who's Chase? Who's Sewell? Bill Polian said that he had everybody in the room and said Manning or Leaf. 5 hands went up for Manning, 5 hands went up for Leaf. What ultimately ended up swaying him to Manning was Bill Walsh. But it sounds like that's the way they did it in Cincinnati. I bet you that's the way they're going to do that here. And yes, Rand will have final say. So if it's hands in the air and it's 5 hands for Odunze and 5 hands for Alt, then Rand's got to make the choice. And that's why they pay him the money to do that. But it sounds like Brian Callahan is going to raise his hand in the air. I was watching YouTube the other day, and, that's my favorite channel now. It's like Jared TV because it's got the algorithm all for the things I like. And there's an NFL Films documentary on the 1994 draft. And the big highlight out of the 94 draft was Mel Kiper Jr. versus Bill Tobin when Bill Tobin went on TV and said, who in the hell is Mel Kiper Jr.? But there was another little story in there that I just found fascinating. And it was behind-the-scenes footage of Kansas City's draft room. And there were 3 running backs that were available that all had similar grades. And there were 3 running backs, and they were going to take a running back, and they were on the clock. And it showed the time counting down. And the guy in New York at the draft had all 3 cards in front of him for all 3 running backs. He was prepared to take whichever card to the commissioner. And as the clock was going down, the GM, Carl Peterson, the head coach, Marty Schottenheimer, may he rest in peace, and the VP of player personnel, I don't know his name, they were sitting in there like really debating it. And ultimately, they decided to go with, I think it was some guy named Greg Bates. But they decided to go with him because Schottenheimer wanted him. And Carl Peterson said at the end, you know what? He's the guy who's got to coach him. You know, if so-and-so hadn't gotten hurt, we wouldn't be having this discussion, but he did get hurt. This guy, you know, we don't have any character issues on him. We don't have any character issues. Who do you like, coach? And Schottenheimer goes, Bates. And then they put the tapes in, and they literally put the VCR tapes in there, and they watched them, and then I think they ended up taking Greg Bates. And my guess is that if, again, we're at that spot at 7, and the Titans are on the clock, and there is an equally good tackle and an equally good receiver, and again at 7, I assume these guys are probably projecting to be elite players. My guess is Brian Callahan's going to want the receiver over the tackle. And not only is he going to want that, my guess is Rand Carthon, just based off of what I know, of what I see and how they want to run this thing, is going to go with what his coach wants to do. So I did find that insightful. And by the way, he could have told me that right then and there just because they want to take Alt and they don't want anybody to think they're going to take a tackle. I have no idea. 615-737-1025. We'll get to your phones on this. A lot of you want to weigh in. 615-737-1025. And then the Skoronski debate. Left guard, left tackle. I asked the coach about it, but they really do need an answer. And I'll explain why. We'll do that next. Stillman and Company on a Fireball Hot Take Friday. It's 102.5, 106.3 The Game. Is there still a discussion of where Peter may play, or are you set on Peter at guard?
I think there's always a discussion. I don't know. That was just my opinion when we were getting ready for the draft on where he fell. I thought he was an outstanding football player, and a lot of times there's traits involved where that doesn't necessarily translate as great to tackle, especially when you're talking about like length and things like that. The edge is a tough place to play sometimes if you don't have those things. Now his athleticism and movement skills and strength are top notch. So we'll see. We'll leave that up to as we get the staff together. We'll still evaluate that. I don't want to pin myself in a corner on saying he's just going to be a guard and all of a sudden you see him at tackle. But I felt like when he was coming on the draft, that was probably his best position. Not to say that as we get going and we get to know him and we start practicing that maybe he still can play tackle. He obviously was really good at it at Northwestern. So I don't want to paint myself in a corner.
There you go. Brian Callahan today saying, I thought he was a guard, but I'm open to him playing tackle. Let me get everybody in here and then we can decide. And let me get the line coach in here and then we can decide. I do think that is notable when it comes to this. So here's the problem, though, is that they don't really practice in the offseason the way that you need in order to be able to evaluate an offensive lineman. I mean, the Titans 2 years ago, granted, probably won't have the offensive line coaching that they had 2 years ago. Probably will be much better, I hope, this year. But the Titans, without pads on, thought Dylan Radins could play right tackle. And then all of a sudden they put the pads on in training camp, and it was like, oh boy, what are we going to do? Same thing with Andre Dillard this past year. I mean, he had the pads on, and they thought, oh, this will be better, and it was not. So it's hard to be able to judge whether or not Skoronski can play left tackle until, quite frankly, it's probably too late. And not only that, the offseason program starts in April after free agency. And here's why this is a big deal about what they're going to do with Skoronski. I'm fine if they say he's a left guard. It still drives me crazy that they took him with the 11th overall pick because, again, he's a guard. But as long as they just decide and put it down and say, okay, then they can go focus on what they need to do with the left tackle or left guard spot. Here's why this is incredibly important right now. There are two left tackles, as we all know, that are at the top of the draft, and it is more likely than not that one of those two tackles will be available with the 7th overall pick. However, when you look at the free agency market, and we don't know who's going to get cut, so there may be some extra names that come available, and there may be some names that aren't available because they get franchise tagged, and there might be some guys who want to demand trades. Who knows? But when you look at what they call the pro board, there's going to be a lot of interior offensive linemen on that. So if I'm the Titans and Peter Skoronski can be a good left tackle, and again, I don't know if he can be or not. They didn't play him there. But if he can be a good left tackle, then with the 7th overall pick, I can go receiver or trade down and not have to worry about getting a left tackle right then, right there. And they can sign a guard in free agency that's a good guard, whether it's a Robert Hunt or who was the other one that I was looking at today? Dotson from the Rams. Kevin Dotson. One of those kind of guys, similar systems, put them in and say, okay, we're paying this guard $15 million, which is a boatload. And honestly, you may have to pay him more. I don't know what the market's going to be. But we're paying this guard $15 million. And he's only an average guard. But that's okay. That's okay because it's money. It's not a pick. And you want to get the elite players with the picks. But that's if Peter can play left tackle. And I don't know if he can or can't. And I don't even know if they know if he can or can't because they never tried it last year. Which is why once we all realized that Andre Dillard and Jalen Duncan were no good, they should have moved him to left tackle, if for no other reason, to see if he could play left tackle, to give themselves an idea of what they had going into this year. That is really, really disheartening. Because if not, what they're going to have to do is whoever the new line coach is, in coordination with Brian Callahan and Rand Carthon, whoever the new offensive line coach is going to have to watch tape from last year of Peter at guard and watch tape of Peter from his senior year at Northwestern and judge the two side by side and then try to figure out, well, could he, if this were Micah Parsons, could he block this guy? But you won't have him versus Micah Parsons. You'll probably have to go back to his tape against the elite pass rushers. And I don't know, what would that be at Michigan? It'd be Aiden Hutchinson 2 years ago, 3 years ago, in order to figure out if he could play tackle at the NFL level. It was a big opportunity that was squandered by Vrabel and his group there at the end. 615-737-1025. Our phone lines, of course, are driven by WilsonCountyHyundai.com. 615-737-1025. A lot of people want to weigh in on the Roma Dunze or tackle discussion after the Chase Sewell discussion we had earlier today with Coach Callahan. And one guy says, I am totally behind Callahan and his knowledge of offense. But the issue I have with his answer about the Sewell-Chase decision is him saying that as long as the quarterback is accurate and can be on point, that the lineman doesn't matter as much. It is important to have linemen, no matter how good or bad the quarterback is. There is an aspect of protections and coverages being broken. What's your take on the answer he gave you about Sewell and Chase? I'm on his side. I think, and I'll use A.J. Brown as the example here. A.J. Brown got you out of a lot of problems. Now, your offensive line was much better when you had A.J. Brown, but he wasn't perfect. David Quessenberry in 2020 started at left tackle, and in 2021 he started at right tackle. And he is a replacement level player. Roger Saffold was always in and out of the lineup, so it wasn't perfect. But with A.J. Brown, you knew you could throw it in the vicinity of where A.J. Brown was supposed to be, and there was a good chance A.J. Brown was going to catch it, which is how you won a game on Thursday Night Football at home against the 49ers, where Dylan Radins started at left tackle against Nick Bosa. I can't even remember who started at right tackle in that game. That's the kind of player we're talking about drafting when it comes to this Chase Sewell discussion. Like right now, if you had to say, hey, Chase or Sewell, I'm taking Chase. Because I believe that the receiver is the second most valuable position in today's NFL, which is why outside of you, nobody seems to trade them anymore. 615-737-1025. Back to your phones. We will replay the Coach Callahan interview coming up here later this hour in case some of you guys missed it as well. Stillman and Company, Fireball Whiskey. That's right. Fireball Cinnamon Whiskey goes down so smooth and it tastes so great. There's no better way to kick off your weekend, championship weekend, than with ice-cold Fireball Cinnamon Whiskey. That's right. Never let you down. Fireball Whiskey goes down so smooth and it tastes so great. That's right, a real cinnamon whiskey. Ignite the night. Please do it responsibly. Be 21 years or older to enjoy. That's Fireball Cinnamon Whiskey.
Will showed a lot of promise. He looked really good. I watched him every week, and he got pounded. And you knew the injury was going to happen. It just was a matter of time because that offensive line was Ole blocking. They were behind the sticks with pre-snap penalties. They didn't give the guy a shot. Drop passes. Again, even against Houston, the second time, DeAndre Hopkins had a key drop in that game. Think about Burks, a key drop late in the year. The second one against Houston early in that game when it was a beautiful throw by Will Levis. So Levis's toughness, his arm strength, everything he did. You saw the Miami game, the Atlanta game, everything in between was outstanding. He had a couple games where he wasn't. The Tampa Bay game, that first Jacksonville game, but overall showed a lot of talent to be that maybe franchise quarterback.
There you go, Mel Kiper Jr. He's got the Titans taking Joe Alt in the first round of his mock draft. Texter into the text line. Our phone line is driven by WilsonCountyHyundai.com on a Fireball Hot Take Friday. Texter into the text line says, Jared, I cannot call the coach of the Titans Callie.
Boy, Callie.
I can't do it. Like, I cannot call the players and the coaches by their nicknames. It's just something that, like, if somebody had, like, a crazy name, then I could do it. Like Chig, right? That's not his name. It's a much larger name, but I'm fine with Chig Okonkwo. But I can't call somebody like, I could never call Ryan Johansson Joey. Because that's like, they're buds. And I'm not buds. I'm the guy on the radio that yells. So I can't. Jared, Coach Callahan's story about Chase over Sewell is great and all, but remember that Joe Burrow has been injured more than he's been healthy. You want Levis to go through that? No, I do not. But, again, I didn't say leave Dylan Radins out there. I said don't use the high pick on the tackle if an elite receiver is there. There's a difference. And also, I've thought about this. Joe Burrow got killed his first year and tore his ACL. I do think that was a protection thing. Joe Burrow's second year, he got killed, and they ended up in the Super Bowl. Joe Burrow's third year, he got killed less, but still got killed, and they end up in the AFC Championship game. And this year, Joe Burrow got hurt by pulling a calf muscle during training camp where he had to be carted off the field. And then, I want to say, his wrist slammed into the ground and he broke his wrist? I'm not sure that was a protection thing. But I understand what you're saying. But they've won a lot of games that way. One texter says, you all thought that Vrabel could carry the leadership torch for Ben Jones and Byard. It never makes sense. Then let them go where they played, and you should have understood their value. I don't know what that means. One texter says, only Neighbors or Marvin Harrison Jr. over the tackles. Roma Dunze is not worth it. I'm not there yet on being able to tell you anything about who is worth what or who's not. I haven't watched enough of it. I haven't seen enough of the breakdowns. We haven't been to the combine yet. But I do think Odunze in that Sugar Bowl, when they played Texas, was freaking awesome. And when I was talking about how he kind of reminded me of Jamar Chase, and then TD told me he's 6'3". To me, Roma Dunze looks tiny on TV. But 6'3"? Oof. JD in Brentwood says, did taking Chase over Sewell result in Burrow not finishing 2 of 4 seasons? Well, the torn ACL season was before Chase or Sewell entered the league. So you can't argue that one. But as far as did it hurt last year? And then again, it should be noted that in the Super Bowl, on the last play of the game, the one that Samaje Perine barely even tried to catch the football on, where Aaron Donald was rolling Joe Burrow into the ground, that Jamar Chase had beaten Jalen Ramsey and was wide open. And we all know Joe was in the zone, that Burrow probably hits him. It's probably a touchdown, and they're probably on their way to a championship, but he got sacked, or at least got hit and couldn't get the ball off and everything else. So would Sewell have made a difference in that? But are you even in the Super Bowl if you don't have Jamar Chase? Robert says, I'm excited the Titans are going to get a chance at a really good player regardless of the position. There's probably going to be a really good wide receiver, a really good offensive lineman. And don't forget, Brock Bowers will probably be sitting there as well. We've gotten a lot of support for Brock Bowers. But I'm not against it. It's kind of got a little Gronk thing going on. All right. Coach Callahan, what he had to say, we'll do that next. We'll replay that interview if you missed it next. Stillman and Company, 102.5, 106.3 The Game. Titans head coach Brian Callahan. Coach, first of all, congratulations. And I just want to say that yesterday, and I told you before we sat down, I said, hey, I'm kind of the mean guy around here, and so, it's okay. But I thought yesterday, everybody wins their introductory press conference. You won yours too. But when you started talking about your entire family, and then I listened to you talk about everybody in Cincinnati and the emotion when you were talking about Zach Taylor, and then you talked about everybody in the building and how you wanted to meet everybody out there. And I was like, this is where society is headed. This is, instead of the way, like my grandparents grew up in the Great Depression.
Sure.
And I think the idea then was, hey, you should be lucky that you have a job and you should be thankful to get to go there every day. And if they tell you to do whatever, you do it. And I don't think society works like that anymore.
No, I don't think so either.
And so when I was listening to you yesterday talk about how you built your program, I'm like, this is going to be a program where it feels to me like you really want to make sure that everybody, even if they're not a player, feels like they're a special part of building what you want the Titans to be.
Absolutely, because if you don't have that and people don't want to be around you and people don't want to be in the building, then you're going to have a harder time connecting with people and you're going to have a harder time getting things done that you want to get done. And that doesn't mean that the culture that I preach is it's not all kumbaya. You know what I'm saying? Like, there's still a lot of work to be done, and we're going to be demanding and we're going to be hard on all those things. But if you don't start your program with you're trying to build relationships, then I think you're missing the point.
Coach, I want to start with the quarterback here because I know, when you take this job, it's kind of like, hey, what do you think of Will Levis? What do you this? What do you that? But what is it like in terms of a partnership with the quarterback? And the reason why I ask about the partnership with the quarterback is because, well, quite frankly, if you guys didn't get Joe right in Cincinnati, you would have been just as fired as he would have been.
Oh, absolutely.
And so it's not even more about like hey, you play for me. It's more of I think, where we are with the quarterback and the coach and the offensive staff and even the offensive line, everything else. It's like hey, we're all in this together right here. When you look at that partnership with Will Levis, where do you think you're probably most excited to get started?
I think there's such incredible room for him to grow. And he has all the physical tools that you would want in a quarterback. And he's a really intense competitor from what I've seen on tape. I see him putting his shoulder down. We probably want to do less of that. But I see him compete really hard, and I think it's important to him. And so there's a refinement that can happen, especially for him. Now he gets to take all the OTA reps, all the training camp reps, and now he's got a chance to develop. Whereas he was sort of competing for a job last year, and rightfully so. Sure. That's how it works. But to see how he played in games with the little bit of reps that he had, there's a lot of really positive things. There's plenty of things that we can correct. But I told him when I first called him that really the most important relationship in the building outside of me, Ran, and Amy is my relationship with him. And you do everything you can to prop the quarterback and put him in a great position. Without that sort of relationship with him and I, it would be difficult. And the best part about it for Will is that he's going to be able to have some input. I want to put him in great position, so the things that he likes, we'll try to highlight. The things that he's not as good at, we'll try to work on and integrate as he gets better. So I think that Will has the ability to be a really good player, and he's willing to work at it. And so my job is to help him get there.
The two things I see with him that I look at that could maybe hold him up. One is there's too many plays that I say are boneheaded plays, but plays that he would like to have back. Mm-hmm. Whether it's a missed throw here or whether it's an interception there or whatever it may be. The second thing is that, quite frankly, over the last 2 years, he gets injured too much. And some of that may be supporting him with a better offensive line or with a better scheme to protect him and get the ball out, or receivers getting open sooner, all of that. But when you look at those two things in particular, how do you go about addressing each one? And do you see the same thing I see?
Yeah, there's and I guess that's probably the best way for me to say that's where the room for improvement comes. And I think when you watch, the plays that you'd like to have back, one of the first things that I've done with quarterbacks every offseason is you take all the interceptions. You take all the throws that should have been interceptions, the ones that didn't count,
sure,
but they should have, and you evaluate what part went wrong. Was it a decision-making error? Was it a accuracy error? Was it a timing error? And then Was it did you force the ball? Did the ball just get tipped? So every interception tends to have its own story. And so as few of those that can be decision-making errors, that's now what you're trying to get to. Like, you're going to throw interceptions. It happens. The ball's going to get tipped. Guys are going to make great plays. But for the quarterback, how do you best keep the ball out of harm's way with your decision-making, with your accuracy, with your timing? And so that's how you look at it. And that's how I see it. And I think there's a lot of room for him to improve with those things over what he's put on tape last year. And obviously we get now a chance to really dig our teeth into an offensive system for a whole offseason without having to worry about competing for the job in that sense.
New Titans coach Brian Callahan's with us. How much film prep did you do for these interviews? Because you're interviewing with all these different teams, and I mean, I know how much like watching film really is. It's not like we watched an hour of film. It's a lot bigger than that. So how much prep did you do for these interviews, and specifically the Titans?
I had I watched a little bit of every team that I interviewed for, but the ones that the ones where there was some quarterback questions, Carolina, here, I wanted to make sure that when they asked me about the quarterback, I had a really solid answer and an opinion that was researched. And so I did watch quite a bit of tape of Carolina, and I watched all of Will's reps from the season. And so I just wanted to make sure that when I got asked the question, I was based on what I've seen, not what I thought I've heard or what I saw in 2 or 3 games in crossover. So I tried my best to be informed. You can't watch every bit of everybody for the interviews, and a lot of it's not really about that part yet. But the young quarterbacks that I knew were going to be questions in the interview process, I wanted to make sure I had a good feel for and were able to articulate the right answer.
Last one on Will. Everybody that I've ever talked to that's been around Will, whether it's here or, I talked to Coach Stoops about it last summer. I talked to Coach Cohen before the draft about it. And everybody that's ever been around Will Levis just freaking loves the kid. Like, Coach Cohen told me that his academic advisor at Penn State went to Indianapolis to watch him throw at the Combine. And it's like, okay. But then there's kind of this reputation with Will Levis that maybe he rubs people the wrong way. How much, again, you said you met him just briefly yesterday. How much because I know you probably did some homework on him talking to other people as well. How much did you get a sense that maybe that reputation's a little overblown?
That's what I felt. I felt like there was it kind of got exacerbated with some of the stories from the draft, the mayonnaise and the banana thing and like just kind of stuff that's silly and doesn't really matter.
Sure.
And I think that's contributed to the perception. I'm the same way. Nobody that I've really talked to has said anything negative about him. And really everything that I've heard at his time here so far is that he loves football. He loves preparing. He's made of the right stuff. And so that part makes me excited. And I haven't sat down with him long enough to form that opinion myself. But I think the best thing that I have going and he has going with me is that I don't have any preconceived notions. And him and I get a chance to start from the beginning and build a relationship. And so he can be whoever he wants to be in that regard. And I'm going to let him. So hopefully some of those things are the silly stuff is silly stuff, and he is more about what everyone says he's about, and that's what it seems like.
So when it was reported you were getting the job, there was like this kind of dig up of all your interviews, and you did an interview before the draft last year where you talked about the offensive line and said that maybe the best offensive lineman was a tackle out of Northwestern who you thought might be more of a guard.
Yeah.
The Titans drafted Peter. They played him at guard last year. There's always been this question about, is Peter going to play guard or is Peter going to play tackle?
Yeah.
I don't know what the draft board looks like. I don't know what the pro board looks like.
Yep.
But is there still a discussion of where Peter may play, or are you set on Peter at guard?
I think there's always a discussion. I don't know. That was just my opinion when we were getting ready for the draft on where he fell. I thought he was an outstanding football player. And a lot of times there's traits involved where that doesn't necessarily translate as great to tackle, especially when you're talking about like length and things like that. The edge is a tough place to play sometimes if you don't have those things. Now his athleticism and movement skills and strength are top notch. So we'll see. We'll leave that up to as we get the staff together. We'll still evaluate that. I don't want to pin myself in a corner on saying he's just going to be a guard and all of a sudden you see him at tackle. But I felt like when he was coming on the draft, that was probably his best position. Not to say that as we get going and we get to know him and we start practicing that maybe he still can play tackle. He obviously was really good at it at Northwestern. So I don't want to paint myself in a corner.
So you guys have the 7th pick, and if Peter's not your left tackle, you got to go get a left tackle. And I look at a situation when you were in Cincinnati where the offensive line needed a lot of work, and you guys went out in free agency and did it, but you sat there with the 5th pick in the draft, and it was either the really good wide receiver or the really good offensive lineman. And both Sewell and Chase have been really good NFL players.
Yep.
You may be in a similar spot here.
No doubt.
Where there's a really good wide receiver and a really good tackle. Did that experience maybe shape how you view that kind of conundrum?
It did, and I'll preface. I'll give you the full story on how that came to be because I think it's a good story. But I'll preface it by saying that every situation is different.
Sure.
But when I was in Denver, we were built very similarly to how ended up being built in Cincinnati. We had 3 really good receivers and a really fantastic quarterback in Peyton Manning, and so that's how he liked to play. That's the way we played offense. And I just remember in a game, and I think it was probably like in November, we played the Patriots at home, and that was a critical game because we never wanted to have to go to Foxborough in the playoffs, and we knew that they were going to be a contending team. We were going to be a contending team. And so that number 1 seed was really important. And I just remember a game, it's kind of late in the game, got to have it, and we throw a go ball down the right sideline for about 40 yards and a go ball down the left sideline, like within 4 or 5 plays, that puts us in position to win the game because New England's going to play press man coverage and challenge you and make you have to complete the ball and go beat their corners who were pretty good. And we won that game. And that always resonated with me. Like when it came down to having to win the game, we had players on the perimeter that could go win one-on-one matchups.
Kind of like the ball you threw here in the playoffs.
Very similar to the ball we threw here in the playoffs, which brings me to that's the next part of the story is even in a game where we got battered up front and Joe got sacked 9 times and probably hit 15 and we really, outside of one drive and one explosive play, didn't really do much in that game. And we get a turnover late in the game, and now they're going to play 2-man, and Jamar goes and wins versus 2-man and wins the game. And so those moments have always stuck with me. When a push comes to shove, do you want to have someone that can go score touchdowns and go win versus tight coverage? And in that debate, the Sewell-Chase debate, which was, again, 2 players that you knew, whichever one we take is probably going to be a 10-time Pro Bowler, first team All-Pro style player. Mm-hmm. And Panay was fantastic, and we loved him. And Jamar was fantastic, and we loved him. And the debate went back and forth, and which one do we need? And I landed on the Jamar Chase side because I saw what he could do for our offense, and I saw Joe throwing to him in college, and so that also helps. Like it's not hard to visualize what it's going to look like. Mm-hmm. And the difference there to me is like Jamar was an elite player, and in that moment for our team in Cincinnati, the elite player that can score touchdowns versus the elite player that can protect the quarterback with the style of quarterback that we had and the style of offense that we ran, we took the guy that could score touchdowns. And it turned out and great for us the next season. Does that mean that that's the same here?
I knew that's where I knew you were going to wrap that up with a. Does that mean that with the 7th pick here we're going to do the same thing? Yeah. No, because the players are different, and I saw that.
But that is there is a philosophy where I tend to lean to the guys that can score touchdowns, because if you're playing the quarterback position well and playing it right, you can negate some of the issues you have as in pass protection if you're playing on time and throwing the ball accurate and all those things. So that's a long-winded way of saying. We'll see, but there is that's a great debate, and it's going to be interesting to see how that shapes up.
So Derrick Henry scored a lot of touchdowns here for the Titans.
He sure
now
did.
He is a free agent, and I do wonder, what the thought is, because it feels like watching him. He thinks right now, at least, that the chapter is closed with him and the Titans. And I would never, if I was hiring a coach, I wouldn't say, hey, you have to re-sign a 30-year-old back who's probably going to cost a significant amount of money because he's as special of a player as he is. But I do wonder, is it just hey, it ended on a great note for him and he was a great player and, on we go? Or is it, hey, it's something we're certainly considering?
I would certainly consider the option, and he has to obviously want that as well. But he's been the face of the franchise, and he's still a really good ball carrier. And you watch that last game against Jacksonville, and he still looks like Derrick Henry. And so, I think if that's as we get into the roster phase of this here, as we get the staff hired and we get into the roster part, that's a conversation to have, because I do think he is a great player. You always are mindful of how you're building your roster and those position values and where you're spending your money. But I mean, Derrick Henry is a fantastic football player, and he's been a pain to play against for the last handful of years. And I'm certainly open to what that could look like.
What do you make of the leadership element there? Because it is a young team, especially on offense, if he's not there.
Yeah, and that's an important part. And I think back sometimes to I wasn't in Cincinnati when it happened, but they released Andrew Whitworth, and probably rightfully so, in the sense that he was 35 years old,
Sure.
and they probably felt like it was time. And I wasn't a part of the decision, but when we got there, all anybody ever said was when they released Whitworth, there was a gigantic void in the leadership in the locker room, and we felt that when we got there in 2019, as Witt's going on to the Rams and playing in Super Bowls. And so that part of it was always made me think about there is a place for veteran players that have really, really deep leadership roles in the locker room, and I don't underestimate that effect on the unit. So those are things that you consider when you're talking about bringing back older players and paying guys. Like, that part is part of the formula.
So I'm going to tell you a story. Last one here. Brian Callahan's with us. I'm going to tell you a story. And everybody listening probably knows this story. Robbie knows this story. But years and years ago, when I first started at the radio station, we had the old general manager of the Titans, Floyd Reese, name on the wall over there. Mm-hmm. He was working there, and we ended up working together for about 5 years. But before we were working together, I had just met the guy. And I grew up a huge Titans fan, and so it's like, this is Floyd Reese. So we're doing our first show together, and I'm just trying to, break the ice because I don't even know him. So I said, this was 2015. The team was terrible. They were 3-13 that year. I go, Floyd, are the Titans going to be any good this year? This might have been April after the draft. And he looked at me and he goes, we don't have a right tackle. I said, that's important, huh? He said, right tackle? I was like, it's pretty important. So the last couple of years, I feel like I've had to tell that story on the radio a bunch. So right tackle's apparently pretty important. I just, I just want you to know that story so I don't have to tell it anymore on the radio.
I'll say this. Anymore, the way the NFL's set up, everybody's usually has at least one dynamic pass rusher. Mm-hmm. Most of them have two. And so if you don't have two tackles, it's going to be hard. And that is an issue for every team in the league because the defensive line continues to get bigger and faster and stronger.
Well, and they don't let you practice on offensive line anymore.
And it's hard. Exactly right. So you're at a disadvantage from the get-go up front, just from that spot. And so, yes, right tackle is important, and we need as many good tackles as we can find.
Coach, congratulations. Thanks so much for doing this.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, Brian Callahan, Stillman & Company, 102.5, 106.3 The Game. Stillman and Company, 102.5, 106.3 The Game, streaming live on Twitter, Twitch, YouTube, and Facebook live from the Spring Hill Heating and Cooling Studios on a Fireball Hot Take Friday. And you know what that means, 5 o'clock. Chad Withrow from Outkick joins us on the program. Chad, let's start your initial reaction to the Brian Callahan hiring and what you've seen so far.
It's a hire that makes a lot of sense. That's my initial reaction to it. They had defense last time. All teams want to go a different direction, it seems like, so they went with an offensive guy. They went with a younger guy who is going to get along with everyone, seems very pleasant, and that was going to be a key part of this hire for Andy Adams-Strunk and for Rand Carthon, and he's going to go along with their organizational chart and everything they want done. I was very impressed with his press conference. I thought he was very composed, handled himself well. I liked how when asked about his offensive philosophy, he immediately went into the passing game, which I think is important, and that's a distinction from prior Titans coaches that emphasized the running game first. So I really liked everything that he had to say. No one knows how good he's going to be. He's never called plays before. He's never been a head coach, but he certainly has the pedigree. And look, there's a lot of coaches who have won the press conference that turned out to be terrible coaches. There's some coaches who did not have good press conferences that turned out to be great coaches. But one step down, and I think it was a successful one for him, where he was great in handling that part of it. And as far as the hire, I just keep going back to it. It really does make sense when you think about what the Titans were trying to get after moving on from Mike Vrabel.
What do you make of the experience that he has, having come from the Bengals where they turned things around, having worked with Peyton Manning? We had him on earlier today, and he was talking about the decision to go with Jamar Chase over Penei Sewell and how Peyton Manning in Denver used his receivers was a big part of why he thought they should go with Jamar Chase. What do you make of all that experience and how maybe it helps or hurts the Titans or doesn't matter at all?
I love it, and I think it helps them a lot. And here's a great example of that, the Peyton Manning piece with this and his work with him. His specific job with Peyton Manning as an analyst or whatever offensive coach he was at the time was basically research assistant on defensive tendencies. And when you have that job for Peyton Manning, I mean, that's PhD level stuff, right? Like Peyton Manning's not going to let you skate with preparation for that. And some of the stories I've read about how Peyton would quiz him on different blitz looks with teams and how Peyton would make him go back 3 and 4 years with a certain coach, even to other teams to look at it, and how one time Brian Callahan got something wrong. He told Peyton Manning they never blitz out of this look, and then Peyton went home and found something from 2 years prior where they blitzed out of that look, and Callahan said, "I'll never be wrong again, my bad," and he wasn't. I really like that level of experience with him. Now, Peyton Manning has also vouched for guys like Adam Gase as head coaches. So I'm not just going to say, because Peyton Manning said he's great, that he's going to be a great head coach. Peyton Manning likes who he likes, and he had a good experience with Adam Gase. He had a good experience with Brian Callahan. But I do like the specific job that he had with Peyton Manning. I like the fact that he's been adaptable. When he got to Detroit with Matthew Stafford's a very different personality from Peyton Manning. He didn't always say exactly what he wanted to see or do in the offense, where Peyton would tell you exactly what he wanted at all times and would clearly communicate it. He had to coax some stuff out of Matthew Stafford, and he worked with him in that way. Joe Burrow is a different personality. So I think adaptability is the word that I keep coming back to describe Callahan, that when you look at his past and the different quarterbacks he's worked with, Derek Carr also being another one that's very different, he's had to adapt along the way to different personality types, and it's worked out in every spot that he's been in. That's great news for Will Levis, who coming out into the draft, he's a different personality type. So he needs someone probably that's adaptable to his style and how he wants things done and is going to get the best out of him. Brian Callahan has shown he can do that with a lot of different types of quarterbacks. The hope is he can do it with Will Levis.
Chad Withrow from Outkick is with us. What do you make of Rand Carthon being given full control over the roster?
I mean, he's the GM. I think he should have it. Most organizations, that would be the case, and unless it's Bill Belichick or probably Jim Harbaugh is going to command a little bit more than most head coaches also. So, look, I'm kind of with you, Jared. I've been listening to your show this week also about it. I haven't been given a lot of evidence that he's a good general manager, but he is the general manager. So if you want a clear line of communication and a clear responsibility chart of what everyone's doing, the general manager should ultimately be in charge of personnel, and that's good and bad. He's accountable for it. We're not asking questions about who's drafting whom or who's going after whom in free agency or who we're blaming, the coach or the GM. It's on the GM ultimately. So I like that part of it, that he's now fully accountable for whatever mistakes he makes moving forward. But to say that I'm thrilled about it and overly confident in his ability as a GM, he's 0 for 1. He's had one off season, and it was terrible. So I don't have any evidence to say he's going to be a good general manager, but I like the fact that at least they're being clear on what his responsibilities are moving forward.
Do you buy the narrative that Vrabel was holding him back?
No, I don't buy that narrative at all. I buy the narrative that they were butting heads simply because if Mike Vrabel disagreed on one little thing, he was going to turn that molehill into a mountain. And I think that's part of the issue with them, falling apart. I don't think they hated each other or anything. I kind of buy that there wasn't this huge dispute all the time. But Mike Vrabel was always going to want to get his way, and if he didn't, then he was going to be upset about it. But no, I don't think Mike Vrabel was holding him back. But here's the good news about it, right? Whether people hate you because you don't think Rand Carthon's any good, or whether people automatically buy into anything the Titans do and say that Rand Carthon is, the next Floyd Reese for this organization. They think he's the greatest thing ever. He's going to have a chance to prove it.
Yeah.
And also now we don't have any questions about who's doing what. So I like that clarity. I like now that when I come on your show and we talk about this, I don't have to get asked the questions about what percentage blame goes to the head coach on this free agent pickup and what percentage goes to GM. It's 100% on the GM now. They hired Brian Callahan to coach. He is going to coach the team. He's going to give his input about what he would like to see, and then Rand Carthon's going to go draft, and he's going to go get the players. So if the players suck and the draft picks don't work out, and they come in and bring another free agent left tackle in that's terrible, then we know who to blame. And I like that clarity now moving forward. It's on Rand Carthon, good or bad. We all know now, there's no questioning it. He is the guy making personnel decisions. So he is the guy to blame, or he is the guy to praise if he gets it right.
I mean, I want him to be right. Like, I think everybody has this hard thing. They're like, oh, yeah, Jared's anti-Rand, and Jared wants Rand to fail, and I want the Titans to be good. I want to be wrong about this. I do. And for some reason now I get mad because everybody thinks that I don't, but I do. But I digress. Chad Withrow is with us.
I totally get what you're saying. People think that because you have strong opinions, you're married to your opinion at all times, and you're just rooting for your opinion to be correct. And I have people telling me this all the time, too. Oh, you're rooting for Will Levis to suck because then you're going to be validated and proven correct. That's not true. I would love for Will Levis to be the franchise quarterback for the Titans for 15 years and be great. I am rooting for him to do well. I didn't like the draft pick. I didn't like him coming out of Kentucky. I don't like that he remains injured like he was in college so far. So I'm not willing to say this guy is the franchise, but they're going to give him a chance to do that. And I'm rooting for him. I hope that he does well. But I'm all about the evidence and what we've seen. And what we've seen from Rand Carthon as a GM is terrible. It's not good. No one can argue with a straight face that he's done a good job as GM so far. It's one off season, too. I acknowledge that. But that's all we have to go on. When Josh Heupel was hired at Tennessee, all I could say was, well, I think the offense is going to score a lot of points because everywhere the guy's gone, they put up a lot of points. And they're going to play fast, and they're going to score points. I don't know how he is as a head coach. I don't know how he'll recruit in the SEC. I don't know if they're going to be championship-level successful, but they're going to score points. That's what I knew about Josh Heupel. But as you see him coach, now it's okay. He's capable of an 11-win season. He's capable of, even when there's a drop-off to a worse quarterback, they can win 9 wins. Okay, now I'm more encouraged about Josh Heupel. And I can speak more highly of Josh Heupel because of that. If Rand Carthon has a great offseason, their draft picks all turn out, they do well in free agency, and the team improves next year, well, guess what? we've got some good evidence to go on with Rand Carthon. And I think that's the distinction that a lot of people have a hard time understanding between what we're saying and what we're seeing. We got to see a little bit more from Rand Carthon.
What do you make of the national narrative that the Titans didn't upgrade going from Mike Vrabel to Brian Callahan? And what do you make of the local narrative that everything was Mike Vrabel's fault?
So, look, I'm going back to my previous answer. The national media that says that is correct because we haven't seen Brian Callahan as a head coach. So I understand someone nationally saying, look, I saw Mike Vrabel take that Titans team to the AFC Championship. They went on a run. They destroyed Lamar Jackson and the Ravens on the road. We saw him take a team that couldn't get over the hump and got them over the hump. We saw Mike Vrabel lead a team with a ton of injuries to the number 1 overall seed in the AFC. So it is a coaching drop-off to go from that to a guy who's never been a head coach before. I think that's factually correct. I don't think it's a knock at Brian Callahan. It's just people saying, well, I've seen what Mike Vrabel is, and now you're going to hire a guy who's never been a head coach. If you go hire Bill Belichick, then you can't say it's a drop-off. But
what if you hire Raheem Morris?
Yeah, or Jim Harbaugh, right? I mean, yeah, it's a drop-off. Like I think that it probably is a drop-off just because we've seen what Mike Vrabel can do. The local narrative that it's all Mike Vrabel's fault. Look, people locally, they want to protect themselves oftentimes with fans. So the convenient narrative now that Mike Vrabel's not here is Mike Vrabel was a jerk. Mike Vrabel's responsible for every draft pick that didn't work out. Mike Vrabel's responsible for every free agent move that didn't work out. He's responsible for everything because he's no longer here. And now they feel like they're being validated. Why? Because Mike Vrabel's not getting a job in the NFL like everyone claimed he would quickly, which surprises me too. So that doesn't surprise me that people are going to go that direction locally, and it doesn't surprise me nationally. Look, I think it was the right move to go with an offensive guy, so I like that. But I don't know what Brian Callahan's going to be ultimately.
I actually think it's more the fans than it is the media that's crapping on Vrabel. But, I mean, the people that are like, Wesley Woodyard said this, I'm like, okay, I don't care what he had to say about Vrabel losing the locker room.
And Wesley Woodyard saying they didn't want to win a Super Bowl.
Yeah.
And I know he came back and sort of adjusted that comment.
Something
and said,
like
hey,
that.
I probably shouldn't have said that. Of course we wanted to win. I mean, that's someone who's emotional about, whatever went down with Mike Vrabel. So I'm not putting too much credence into what Wesley Woodyard said about that. Mike Vrabel's personality is one that you're going to love him or hate him. I mean, I'm sure we could find other Wesley Woodyards that hate Mike Vrabel.
Well, that's like what you just said about how, like, the narrative now is, Mike Vrabel's a jerk. You didn't know that?
Exactly. And here's the other thing that bothers me about a lot of decisions being made across the league. I think Raheem Morris is a good example of this also. There are so many people in power that work in businesses that's results-oriented that they don't hire the most talented person. They hire the person they can control, because what ultimately matters to a lot of people, general managers, presidents of football operations, even owners, is power. They want to be in charge. They want to have power over someone, and they want to be able to be the one that has the power. They're less concerned with what's going to win. And I want more people to make decisions to hire the most talented people. This is not just football coaches. This is all walks of life. Hire the most talented people. And if they're a little bit difficult, deal with it. Because most talented, smart people I've come across are a little bit difficult at times. They're demanding. They like things done a certain way. They have a work ethic about them. That's fine. You can deal with that. Now, I'm not saying go hire someone who's a complete jerk to everyone in the office, that no one respects, that no one wants to work for. You don't want that either. But there's a balance there. And just going with the nicest person that's going to say yes, sir, and yes, ma'am all the time and do whatever you say and not question things, I think that's a mistake a lot of organizations, not just in football, but a lot of organizations out there make.
Chad Withrow is with us. To the hot seat next. Stillman and Company, 102.5, 106.3 The Game.
Attention all fire.
It's a great question. I'm going to say head coaching job in the NFL. I don't think Mike Vrabel wants to coach in college. He could have that job, and he's going to be in the mix for that job if Ryan Day does not beat Michigan and get right there, get very close to a national championship. But I think he wants to be in the NFL. He don't want to deal with recruiting and NIL. That's really not who he is. He wants to coach ball, and that's all he wants to do, and he wants to be around a team. So, look, if he doesn't get the Seahawks job this go-around, I believe that he'll have a job next year in the NFL with a year removed.
Do you think he should be trying to get a D coordinator job or just sit on the couch and eat ice cream?
I don't think – look, if he really wants to coach ball the way I hear, then he will take a D coordinator job just because he wants to coach. But I don't think he's going to do that. I think it's head coach or bust for him. I think he's going to sit around – I don't know if he's going to be sitting around eating ice cream, but he's going to be sitting around for a year, traveling around, seeing different programs, doing different things. But he'll sit out a year and then become a head coach next year.
I will say this, though. Like, every time Ohio State doesn't cover next year, it'll be like, well, Mike Vrabel's available, and that'll at least be something.
He is going to be the name every time Ryan Day struggles, especially given how Ohio State has gone all in on the transfer portal this year and what they've done. They have loaded up. This is an absolute make-or-break year for Ryan Day. So, yeah, you're right. Every time they struggle in the least bit, Ohio State fans and everyone's going to start clamoring for Mike Vrabel.
Is it a knock on Mike Vrabel that he did not get the Falcons job over Raheem Morris or the Panthers job over Dave Canales?
I don't think it's a knock. I think it's a little weird. First, let me start here. He's at a disadvantage because he's on the defensive side of the ball. I do believe that. We're seeing a trend now, and it's been going on for a little while, where a lot of places they want to hire the young gun offensive coordinator. They want to hire the young offensive, the quarterback guru. And that was the Dave Canales move in Carolina, which doesn't surprise me. The whole Atlanta situation, I don't think it's necessarily a knock at Bill Belichick or Mike Vrabel as much as Arthur Blank just admitting a mistake. I think he thinks he should have hired Raheem Morris instead of Arthur Smith when he was the interim coach. And he saw Raheem Morris go and have success in L.A. under Sean McVay, and he wanted to make sure he did his due diligence and interviewed a lot of people, and he talked to 14 different candidates. And the whole time it was confirmation bias. He really wanted to hire Raheem Morris, but he also wanted to allow himself to be talked out of that decision. And after talking with everyone, he just came to the conclusion, this is the guy who's going to work best with our front office, and I want to bring him back because I should have hired him instead of Arthur Smith. I think that's what happened there. Now, the whole Bill Belichick thing, to me, this is sad. If the end of Bill Belichick's career is one of the 8 openings interviewing him and then not hiring him and he can't get a job, that's a sad ending to me.
That takes me to the next one.
He coaches again if he wants.
That takes me to the next one on the hot seat. Is Bill Belichick done coaching?
I think he probably is. And how sad that is, right? He's not going to get a job this cycle, it looks like. So is he going to wait a year and then 73-year-old Bill Belichick going to be more desirable for some team a year from now? I don't think so. Jared, I wish he just would have retired when he got let go by the Patriots. And we could have had a big celebration for Bill Belichick at that point. I threw out this also. You know what I'd actually love to see? Bill Belichick and how he could end his career full circle is to be the head coach at Navy, where it all started for him with his dad coaching there and how much reverence he has for that program. That would be so cool to see Bill Belichick at Navy for 3 or 4 years to close out his career, because I don't think he's going to get an NFL job, and that surprises me. And it's a sad ending to maybe, the greatest coach of all time. But I think that's where this thing is headed.
My thing with Bill is I just don't think Bill can go to these teams and say, hey, I just want to coach. Get a GM, we're going to get an offensive coordinator. I just want to coach. But I do think with Bill that, a Dallas, a Philadelphia, a Buffalo, like if things don't go the way they want there, I could see them looking at Bill as the answer to a problem.
But see, I think about Lombardi at the end of his career. He leaves Green Bay and he's in Washington for, I think, 1 season. And Washington was in reset mode at that point. It was basically like start the franchise from the ground up. You're Vince Lombardi, come coach here for a little bit. To me, that's where Bill Belichick's going to land. I understand the thinking, but let's say the Bills decide to move on from Sean McDermott and they think, well, Bill Belichick's the guy that's going to win a Super Bowl for us. We'll get an upgrade with him. I think that guy would be Mike Vrabel. If you want a kick in the pants, slightly different culture, and a shock to the system, I think Vrabel is more of that upgrade as a coach than Belichick. And here's why. It's the reason you just laid out. He's not going to go somewhere and say, hey, I just want to coach. I don't want any other decision-making. He's not capable of doing that. Who should have hired Bill Belichick is the Carolina Panthers, because they're in need of a complete reset and building from the ground up. They've got the number 1 overall pick at quarterback, but they got to build that thing from the ground up. That's who should hire Bill Belichick. It's a job like that the team is terrible, and you allow him to come in and be Bill Belichick for 4 to 5 years and see if you can build it up to something that's sustainable and that wins. I don't see him as that slight upgrade that's going to come in and get along with everyone else in the organization. I see him as a guy who builds, and that's what that's the job he should have had.
Who is more likely to win a Super Bowl first, Jim Harbaugh or the field of new coaches?
Jim Harbaugh, and it's because of the quarterback. I think they're going to be so much better right away because I do believe Jim Harbaugh is such an upgrade over Brandon Staley. They're going to be a playoff team next year. Staley got in the playoffs the one time. They blew the game against the Jags. I'm taking Jim Harbaugh, given his situation, given his quarterback, over all the other new coaches.
Well, don't forget about all the cap trouble they're in, over there. They'll maybe
I heard you and Joe arguing about the cap.
Maybe they'll have to cut the quarterback.
I gotta agree with Joe. I do think that there's ways to manipulate it, like you said, but you still have to do something.
Well,
it is real, even if you have to jump through. If there's a possibility to jump through a bunch of hoops to manipulate it a lot, it's still there. It still does exist. There's just ways to work around it.
It just doesn't do anything other than, be there for people to say, oh, we can't because of the cap. But I digress. Is Patrick Mahomes better than Tom Brady?
He's on his way. He's not there yet, but he's absolutely on his way. If they win this year, think about that offense this year and how bad that offense was all season. And they just figured it out in the playoffs. Figured it out against the Dolphins. Figured it out, albeit against an injured Bills defense, but figured it out against the Bills. If they go to Baltimore and win, Baltimore is 6-0 against teams that are 3+ games over 500. And they're averaging winning by 22 points per game in those 6 games. They have killed good competition this year. That's how good that Ravens team has been against the best teams in the league. If Mahomes and KC goes to Baltimore and wins this year with this team, and then they go on to win another Super Bowl, he is well on his way to far surpassing Tom Brady as the greatest quarterback of all time.
If the Ravens lose, does Lamar Jackson have the can't win the big one moniker hanging over his head?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I said this about Josh Allen, too. Josh Allen is Peyton Manning. I know they're different style quarterbacks, but that's where he is right now in his career. Now, keep in mind, Peyton Manning, 6 years into his career, had not won a single playoff game. Josh Allen is 6 years into his career. He's won 5 playoff games. But he can't get over the hump and win the big one. And that was always the knock on Peyton. Peyton had to fall behind, I think, 24-0 to the Patriots in 2007, and then mount a miraculous comeback and win at home and get to a Super Bowl and win it. That's how he had to vanquish those demons and make it happen. I think it's going to happen for Josh Allen. He's going to get over the hump. He's going to win a Super Bowl. I feel the same about Lamar Jackson, but this is so huge for him because if they lose, I think you're right, he's going to get the knock that he can't win the big one. But if they win and go on and win the Super Bowl, he's every question about Lamar Jackson that's ever been asked will be answered at that point. And he will be one of the 2 or 3 greatest quarterbacks in the NFL currently.
Is Brock Purdy a special quarterback, or is he a product of what's around him?
He's a product of what's around him. Brock Purdy is, at his best, he's Kirk Cousins for another team. And I think Kirk Cousins, to an extent, is a product of his environment, too. But I think that's where his ceiling is. He is a product of the Kyle Shanahan system. He's done a great job. This is no knock on him. But it's not like Brock Purdy gets signed by the Tampa Bay Buccaneers and he's a top 5 quarterback in the NFL or he's in the MVP discussion. He's a product of Kyle Shanahan's brilliant offensive system and great supporting cast. I really think that's what it is. Good quarterback, but his stats and his surrounding cast make him a great quarterback.
Last one for you. Who wins this weekend?
So who I want to win, Lions and Chiefs. I'd love that storyline, America's Sweetheart versus America's Supervillains with Taylor Swift and the Chiefs. But what's going to happen, Ravens, 49ers. We're going to see a rematch of what was the 2012 season when it was the Harbaugh Bowl.
Yep.
Last time the Ravens and 49ers squared off in a Super Bowl. I think we're getting that one again.
Chad Withrow from Outkick, as always, joining us on a Friday. Chad, appreciate you.
All right. Thanks, Jared. Have a good weekend.
Yep.
What he did in college, and then the Ravens organization and how much success they've had my entire life. I knew that he was going to put him in the right position to win, and we were going to be playing a lot of big games, AFC Championship, playoff games, whatever that was. And so it's cool to see that we're finally here. We're finally playing our first playoff game against each other, and it's going to be a great challenge.
I don't like competing against him at all. But, yeah, I mean, he's a great quarterback. Definitely a Hall of Famer. It's not even it's a no-brainer. He's definitely a Hall of Famer. But it's just, I believe it's just two greats, up-and-coming greats just going toe-to-toe, like a heavyweight fight, heavyweight matchup. That's just what I see.
There you go. That was Lamar Jackson and Patrick Mahomes facing each other. And I will say this, Lamar is right. That is going to be a heavyweight matchup this weekend. And I would be remiss. I know the Titans hired a coach, and we talked to the coach and all that. I do want to talk about these games, though. Because, first of all, what I love about Conference Championship Weekend is that Floyd used to always tell me that this is the saddest weekend of the year. And I said, what do you mean, saddest weekend of the year? And he's like, if you've ever lost in one of these, in the Conference Championship game, it hurts the most out of any loss you can have because, he says, you had a great season and nobody will remember it. He says, you get knocked out in the divisional round of the playoffs. That's a good season for the most part. If you win the division, you got a hat and a T-shirt, but, a lot of people win divisions every year. If you win, you get to the Super Bowl and you lose the Super Bowl, hey, at least you made it to the Super Bowl. At least you have the memory of going to the Super Bowl and playing on the grandest stage and everything else. And this one, you lose this. How many people remember that the Green Bay Packers, with Matt LaFleur as the coach, lost the NFC title game in 2019 and 2020? It's amazing, right? I mean, again, I guess everybody in the world remembers that Vrabel made it to an AFC championship game, but you know what I mean. So, in these games, I think there is something kind of on the table for all of them. The first, and I'll start with the NFC game first. The first is Detroit. I think this is it for Detroit. Like, maybe Dan Campbell's a genius and he hires another Ben Johnson. Maybe Detroit keeps it. They keep coming back, and they still got good players. And they're kind of young. St. Brown is young, and Goff's regular age, and Sewell's young, and Gibbs is young, and okay. But I kind of feel like Detroit is, I don't want to say like that 2019 Titans team, because Detroit's been good all season. But it kind of feels like Detroit, like this is their window right here, and then they lose the coordinator. And again, when you lose a coordinator and the head coach isn't the play caller and they rely on the OC's offense, I just get very nervous. I think Philadelphia is a good example of that, where they lose Shane Steichen and all of a sudden it's a total nightmare for what they're trying to do. So with Detroit, it's like this is your shot. Detroit, it would be so nice to see Detroit in a Super Bowl. I'd have a hard time rooting against Detroit in a Super Bowl. I mean, I haven't really been rooting for Detroit this season, but I haven't been rooting against them. I think it's good for the fans. But, again, if they lose this, it's like, wow, you made it all this way, and now you start back at the beginning and you lose your OC. So that's the first one. The second one is Brock Purdy. So with Kyle Shanahan, when they traded Trey Lance, it was like, we did this because Brock Purdy is our guy. And Brock Purdy played quarterback this year, and Brock Purdy played quarterback well. But I've never watched Brock Purdy play quarterback and thought to myself, this dude is right now, and it's still early, he's still young, this dude is a true franchise quarterback. I have never thought that. Now, I guess I've never thought that because I've never thought it. Maybe I'm the one that's crazy. What I thought was odd was I didn't think Purdy played very well the other night and against Green Bay, and then everybody this week on TV was like, take that, Brock Purdy haters, and I was like, what? I'm like, Purdy had some nice throws. A touchdown throw to Kittle was gorgeous. Debo was out. That makes him worse for sure, but take that in that Green Bay game? Now, if you were a Mahomes hater, you could say that game was a take that game, what he did against Buffalo, but I don't think that that's a take that game from Brock Purdy. So I don't know what Kyle Shanahan's thinking here. He's really gotten the entire team right the entire way. Debo Samuel, Brandon Ayuk, Trent Williams. Great trade they made there. Fred Warner, Dre Greenlaw, George Kittle, great draft choices, developing his stars, and then they pay them. Except quarterback. Every position it feels like they have. They made that huge trade for McCaffrey that I think a lot of people were shocked that they ended up making for McCaffrey when they did. And he's probably the second most valuable player behind Lamar this year. So, I mean, I look at San Francisco and I'm like, every position they've nailed except quarterback. Garoppolo, they thought they had it nailed because they acquired him in 2017 and he won a bunch of games on the back end. 2018, I think he got hurt. 2019, they got to the Super Bowl, but he missed that wide open Emmanuel Sanders. And if he hits that wide open Emmanuel Sanders, he's Super Bowl MVP. But he didn't. And then ever since then, Shanahan's kind of been out on Jimmy. He drafts Trey Lance and says, we're going to play Jimmy this year, but we don't really want to. They play Jimmy. They get to the NFC Championship game. They lose it, probably in large part because of Jimmy. Then they go to Trey Lance. He gets hurt. Jimmy gets hurt. They go to Brock. They get to the NFC Championship game again. Brock gets hurt. Then they get rid of Trey. They get rid of Jimmy, and so Brock's the guy. And, I like Brock, but I don't see the it factor there with Brock Purdy. I think Brock Purdy, winning with Garoppolo, it's a product of Shanahan. If Shanahan has a legitimate quarterback, and I'm not even talking about an A1 quarterback like these other guys, Goff. If he's got that kind of quarterback, he makes Matt Ryan league MVP. The only time Kyle Shanahan doesn't work is when he's got Johnny Manziel at quarterback like he did in Cleveland. Other than that, he works all the time. So here you are in this NFC Championship game against a very good Detroit team, but your team is better. You're favored. You're playing at home. I mean, if you can't get it done, I do wonder, should Kyle be looking? There will be Kirk Cousins who's out there, who is Shanahan's guy. There will be quarterbacks. Ryan Tannehill will be out there. So I think this is huge for Brock Purdy. If they win, then I think, all of a sudden we start talking about how Brock is not in the group, but he's getting there. So Detroit, this may be their shot. San Francisco, this one's kind of on Purdy. Then there's the AFC game. Now let's start with Mahomes because Mahomes doesn't lose anything. If Kansas City goes into Baltimore and loses, nobody will walk away from that thinking, man, Mahomes didn't play well. Mahomes isn't awesome. Mahomes isn't the best quarterback in the league. Mahomes isn't. So he's got nothing to lose. But if they win with that offense that has been straight garbage for most of the season, with two other offensive skill players, right? Rashee Rice, Travis Kelce. I'll say three because Pacheco. But other than that, it's Marquez, Valdez, Scantling, and the remains of Mecole Hardman and Noah Gray. And, I mean, it's a Nobodyville out there. It's not like he's throwing to Tyreek. So if he goes in there against that Ravens defense, and you saw what that Ravens defense did to C.J. Stroud last weekend. You saw what they did on Christmas to San Francisco. Was it 4 turnovers for Brock Purdy? If they go in there and they win that game, then I think all of a sudden, I don't want to do the Mahomes Brady. I can't, I love Brady. But it'd be hard to argue that Mahomes isn't approaching. And then on the other side, this is all about Lamar Jackson, which is crazy because, Baltimore's defense is not chopped liver. They've got a great running game. Todd Monken has done a fabulous job with that offense, but this is all about Lamar Jackson. And Lamar has that moniker around his head that says he cannot win the big game. And it started when he, that first game he had against the Chargers, I think people forget in the playoffs, it started when the Titans went in there and demolished them in 2019. And then the next year, they got housed in the second half against Buffalo. And so it's like, okay, Lamar can get them to a 14-2 record in the regular season. He can win the MVP because he's going to win 2. Lamar, he's 58-19 in his career as a starter, which is just truly amazing. And Lamar has had his haters every step of the way, and that includes me. Now, I wasn't a hater when he was in college because I loved him at Louisville, but I didn't think that it'd work. But as far as elite quarterback, Burrow, Mahomes, those kind of guys. He wins this, he's there. And I've always said this, outside of Dan Marino, it feels like every legit Hall of Fame quarterback wins one Super Bowl, right? Like Russell won one, Drew Brees won one, Aaron's won one. They at least win one. Manning won 2, Brady won 7. But again, we're not trying to say Brady here. But all the legit ones, they win at least one. And it kind of feels like this is the year for Lamar Jackson to win his one. Okay, now we got to pick them. Now we have to, and I have been squirming all week about picking this Baltimore-Kansas City game. 6-pack picks. We did terrible last weekend. 6-pack picks is next. Stillman and Company on a Fireball Hot Take Friday. It's 102.5, 106.3 The Game. Been squeaming all week at the idea of picking the AFC Championship game, and I am very, very nervous about this. Ian, how did we do last week?
Not very good. You got one right. Detroit.
I'm actually surprised by that. I thought I got them all wrong.
Houston wins. You picked Houston to straight out win. San Francisco did not cover the 9.5. Buffalo did not win either, but Detroit did cover the 6.5. So 1-3 last week for a season total of 63, 61, and 2.
Okay.
So 2 games above 500. We will start with the AFC Championship game, Chiefs at the Ravens. The early game on Sunday, CBS, 2 o'clock. Over-under, 44.5. Baltimore, -3.5.
First of all, it is the early-ish game. I mean, I don't know if I like these like little primetime Sunday games, but it is what it is. Society's changed. And I was thinking about this, and not to get you off on the tangent here, but I think the reason why they've moved these games back is because people used to watch shows on Sunday night, and now they don't. Ian, what was the spread again?
Baltimore -3.5, over-under 44.5.
I'm taking Baltimore. I literally just decided it right now as I'm talking. I'm taking the Ravens. And I will tell you why I am taking the Ravens. Because as much as this is going to be about the quarterbacks, and yes, Mahomes is starting to turn into that dude, and if he wins this game, he is that dude. Well, I would say that dude, but he is there. Like, he is... again, like I said earlier, I don't want to be somebody to sit there and say that he's better than Brady, because to me, Brady is the best, but the best can be beaten sometimes. I think that Baltimore is going to win because of their defense. I think that Lamar is going to have a good game. I don't think Lamar is going to have a great game, and it would require an out-of-this-world game from Lamar. Mahomes, in order to beat Lamar. Give me Baltimore. I'll take the Ravens.
Okay, then we move to the late game, the NFC Championship, 5:30 on Fox with our favorite Greg Olson. The Lions at the 49ers, over-under, I think is the highest of the playoffs if I can remember, 51.5. 49ers -7.5.
Oof, 7.5's a lot. I'll take San Francisco. I think that San Francisco to win. Look, they burned me last week because Brock Purdy didn't play well. And as I said, if Brock Purdy blows this game, I think Shanahan's going to go bring in Kirk Cousins. I think that he's looking at his team, and he's looking at Jimmy, and he's looking at the rest of that, and I think that he is going to sit back, and he is going to say, all right, Brock Purdy is decent, but he's not Super Bowl ready yet, and let me go get Kirk Cousins with this great team and let me see what I can do. They would prefer not to do that because they'd have to pay Kirk Cousins, whereas they don't have to pay Brock Purdy. But, again, they're trying to win the Super Bowl in San Francisco, so I will take San Francisco to win this game. I'll lay the 7. What was the over-under again?
51.5.
51.5. Oof. I'll take the under. I think this will be rather low scoring. Both teams actually have shockingly okay defenses. I'll take the under. And then what was the Baltimore game?
44.5.
44.5 on Baltimore. I'll take the under. Again, as I said, I'm picking Baltimore because of their defense. I think this will be a little bit of a defensive game. Lamar will play okay. He won't play great. So I've got Baltimore and San Francisco in the Super Bowl. Boy, I'm really going out on a limb there. So that'll do it for us. Great show. Everybody have a great weekend. Enjoy the games. We will see you all Monday at 2.